Today, we find ourselves living in a world that is accelerating rapidly, faster than the average person can comprehend. We seem to be leaving ourselves behind as a new world is ushered in all around us. Powerful technologies emerge before we can understand what they are and how they will affect our world and our consciousness. We sit on the precipice of becoming a space culture, and the weight of that reality challenges everything we think we know about our origins and our ancient past. It locks us in a future so technologically advanced and exclusive to the groups that are creating it, that the organic world we know today, if we are not careful, will disappear. In all of this, where is our spirit? Where is the one thing that can put all of this chaos into balance? That can bring clarity? Where is our core, our power? How do we adapt spiritually to a world that seems to bear no relation to the times in which many of our religious texts were written? In this new space age, our idea of spirituality will be replaced with the study of consciousness. Spirituality will rise to become a science. This is inevitable. However, today we have a choice. We can include our spirit, or we can leave it behind. And this decision will define you. The answer is that we must return to the impulse inside of us that leads us back to ourselves. The Christ impulse. Our Christ consciousness. The force that all great spiritual teachers have embodied, and the stream of consciousness in which all real spiritual power emerges. It is this power that links us deeply into our spirit, each other, and the higher timelines of reality that leave no one and nothing behind. It is through this force that humanity can be reborn into a higher image of itself and become the human for the new era that is emerging. And it is the force in which all solutions arise. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our little impromptu gathering this Sunday. I am so glad to be here with you all, and today is going to be a little bit different than our usual meeting because I'm actually going to do a bit of a presentation for you today. It's probably going to run about maybe like an hour and a half to 2 hours. I will obviously be in a bit of a trance state, so I'm not sure how long it will take to get through all of this information, but I'm thinking I'll keep you here with the presentation for at least maybe 2 hours or so, and then I'd really like to take the last bit of time, however long really it takes, but maybe an hour or so, and take your questions at the end. So if you have any questions about the material that I'm talking about, just sort of write them down, put them in chat as I'm going, and then Wolf will take your questions and he'll put them aside and send them to me, and then at the end I'll answer them. And the one thing that would be great is if you just kept the questions about the topics here, because although this is appearing on the members site, I am going to share this probably at some time next week on YouTube, so it's not an exclusive video, but the exclusivity is that I will be taking your questions, but it will appear on YouTube in the coming days. So keep that in mind. And also, there should be a PDF or a companion guide that is in the chat or in your email. It's also on my social media account so that you can kind of follow along with the topics covered today and be here right with me as we're going through it. So I thought before we dive into this topic, I would discuss what inspired this sort of presentation today. And something very interesting is happening in society where we are suddenly becoming a cosmic culture, or we're suddenly becoming a space culture. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but you know, the spirituality scene is suddenly full of the starseed movement and people having experiences with interdimensionals and ETs. And for the first time, we see spirituality being about interdimensionality. You know, the other side is no longer this sort of random, weird place where you go when you die and who knows what's going on there. It's now been delineated into very specific dimensions and densities, and there's a scientific element to the New Age and spirituality that we are seeing emerging. And with that scientific element, that study of consciousness, you know, we're also seeing this addition where it's becoming cosmic, where we're becoming a space age. We're moving more and more towards being a space age society. You know, we have the Space Force. We have these weird kind of announcements that we've already talked about here so much. And so this means that we have to update and evolve our perspective about a lot of different religious ideas and esoteric ideas, spiritual ideas. We need to start updating this to where our consciousness is going. And, you know, humanity evolves, and our idea and our connection with spirit has to evolve as well. And we are evolving into more of a spiritual science, or the science of consciousness. No longer do we have to guess about things. We can now study them very carefully, almost using a scientific method, and understand spirituality. So we can see that the spiritual scene is moving in this way, and we have to evolve. And part of that is readdressing what our spirit is. What is the core of our spirit? What is it that makes us divine? And this, of course, is something called the Christ impulse. And when we study the Christ impulse, or the Christ stream, or Christ consciousness, we can see that it has a very interesting journey through time, and a very specific effect on humanity through time, as a driving force for humanity. When we study Christ consciousness in this way, we can see that it has different shapes as it moves through time, and different densities. It can be an individual human being, as we see manifesting in the Buddha or in Jesus Christ. It can be a vast consciousness, as we see very clearly today, that is so paramount to the age of Aquarius. But it can also be specific groups as well. And so we have to evolve also our idea of what Christ is, what Christ consciousness is, perhaps more away from these dogmatic ideas that Christ is only a man, and these reduced ideas about what Christ consciousness is, and let go of a lot of that and begin to bring it back into a more exalted, I think truthful, esoteric view of what Christ is, the Christ impulse, and the Christ stream. And so that is what we are really going to be focusing on today. What is the Christ stream, and how has it really affected humanity over time, okay? And it's going to be a little strange, though, because it's not going to talk about this in the way that you're used to. I'm not going to talk about this in the way that is traditional. And I'm going to bring in very direct themes that exist within the New Age. And that's actually what inspired this video. Is while I was going through my experience in the New Age and in spirituality, I noticed that there were very distinct narratives appearing about humanity, how humanity evolves, and how avatars come to us on Earth, what that process is, what the process of human evolution is, what the process of ascension is. And I started seeing all of these ideas about what ascension is, and what healing is, what evolution is. And I noticed that there were very distinct narratives that were external narratives, that were all about basically humanity evolving through external interference.
And then in direct contrast with that, I noticed that some of the most ancient teachings said that man was divine and that man didn't evolve through external interference at all. We were divine and we've always been divine. And so I struggled with these questions because they both appear with intensity in the spiritual scene. And as we move more into this spacefaring society, we will be confronted more and more with this question, because the spacefaring society that we are moving into will deal with ETs, will deal with interdimensionality and high technology and consciousness in a way that we haven't in thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And with that, we'll be introduced with what is the genesis of mankind? What is mankind? Who are we? How do we evolve? Do we evolve externally or internally, primarily? And so that's what really inspired this presentation today. And that's where this is really coming from, is how do we evolve? And so let's without further ado, let's get started on that. And I'm going to talk about this through the idea of timelines. Okay, so what is a timeline? Also through what is the Antichrist stream. We're also going to touch on that today. Direct myths about Christ. Okay, Christ's conception, we're going to get into that. Also, we're going to touch on the idea of interdimensionals, interdimensionality, and breakaway civilizations. So, woo! Definitely not your traditional idea about Christ. Definitely not your traditional idea about Jesus or any of these topics, okay? All right. So, what is a timeline? To understand how, humanity has evolved and how it does evolve, we have to understand that humanity is interdimensional. Okay, we live in a time where, we think everything is material. We think everything is linear, but it's not. Humanity is not linear. And so the best way to look at humanity and humanity's evolution is to see it as timeline. So what is a timeline? Okay. A timeline is a specific stream of consciousness. A specific stream of consciousness that has played out over time. So it's a stream of consciousness that has been materialized in the 3D realm, okay? And these can be personal. You can have personal timelines that you're building and that you're connecting to and that you're creating. Or they can be collective. Okay, this is that multidimensionality that humanity has. We can have a collective timeline that we're all moving within, that we're all contributing to. Say we can maybe address that with politics or certain earth changes or whatever that we all share through our collective consciousness, a collective timeline. And then we have that individual timeline in our life where we're trying to perhaps always move into the highest timeline available, or we're always trying to evolve. We're always trying to align ourselves into a great harmony so that we can be in a timeline of evolution, not regression. Okay, so that's what a timeline is, okay? It's literally our mind working with physical matter to create a linear force. That's what a timeline is, okay? And so if you were to look at them psychically, a lot of timelines will appear sort of like a rope full of many little streams of consciousness that are merging to create the timeline. That's kind of how you would see it. And it's sort of interesting that we have this fascination with AI and electronics and things like that, because that's kind of like a cord, right? Except rather than it be pieces of copper or conductive metal, we're looking at like literally threads of consciousness. And so there is something about AI, which we will talk about in this presentation, where it does kind of mirror this esoteric reality of streams of consciousness banding together to basically be the engine of timelines, okay? All right. And so as you can imagine, humanity is creating timelines all the time. And one of the best ways to discern timelines is to just kind of break them down into the two basic impulses, which is the progressive impulse or regressive impulse. So part of timelines can be progressing and evolving, kind of coming full circle, or timelines can be regressive, where you're actually not evolving and you're actually moving backwards. So humanity has a decision all the time, personally, as a personal individual and as a collective, whether we are evolving or regressing. And there are specific timelines that humanity connects with that are either regressive or progressive. And this is really, really, really important because this leads into the creation of worlds. And if you are aligning with a progressive timeline that is organic and evolving, then you're going to, your consciousness is going to ride that stream into a higher world and evolve back up through the dimensions and densities. And that's what we call ascension. We ascend as individuals, but we also ascend as a world. Okay, the earth itself also ascends. Now, also, we can descend as a person. We can align with a descension timeline, which means that we devolve as a person. We regress as a person rather than integrating our entire chakra system and our karma, facing our shadow, we devolve. This is called the beast system. We develop the beast system when we devolve, okay? And that also means that there is an earth that is also devolving. And at the end of this cycle, as I've mentioned before, the earth kind of splits in two. And humanity will either take the organic progressive timeline or the lower timeline, okay? The regressive timeline. And different worlds will emerge to house those spirits within those souls, within those distinct vibrational frequencies, okay? So this is what timelines are. And you can zoom into those and get extremely distinct, or you can zoom out and you can view them for their dominant vibration, which is either going to be progressive or regressive, love or fear, okay? So timelines are not just esoteric. They're not just an idea of something that exists in the astral plane or in the higher dimensions. They're not just this esoteric concept that we don't really grasp what it is. No, we can track our thoughts and see exactly what they're creating and how they're extrapolating over time. And we can call that a timeline that's based in a very specific frequency of thought, okay? And in my video called Breakaway Civilizations, or the 2 Breakaway Civilizations, this is tying into this. Because as humanity evolves through time, there are individuals who evolve into these higher spheres, into this higher timeline, and they get uplifted in it. And they begin to form a civilization of itself. Earth begins to form around a civilization that is multidimensional, around this progressive timeline, around this progressive consciousness, this progressive impulse. This impulse is the Christ impulse. Maybe you guys could sense that I was already going there with this. This progressive impulse, this engine, positive timeline is fed by the energy that is the Christ impulse, okay, or the Christ stream. The stream that exists within everyone as an individual, that exist as a vast force in the collective that's informing everything and everyone, that can also manifest on Earth as a group or a conglomerate, that can also manifest in an avatar, okay? But if we were to look at that whole dynamic, we can see that it's all resonating with the organic, progressive timeline. It's an alchemical energy that forces us along by its sheer force and power and light to face our shadow, to evolve, and it forces us back upwards after the fall. Okay, that is that beautiful Christ stream energy, all right? It's a progressive energy. And so this is why these sort of avatars and different individuals will move interdimensionally through the earth as masters and great adepts and things like that, as they're moving from this timeline, they're moving from this core stream, okay? They're initiates and adepts of that particular stream. And so if you're wondering a little bit more deeply about that, do check out my Breakaway Civilizations video, where I really get into how this stream and the Antichrist stream have interacted with the planet over time. Okay, So these timelines, the progressive timeline and the regressive timeline, can represent actual civilizations, okay? Multidimensional civilizations in which we only see the very, very basic element of them. We don't see sort of the hierarchies of angels, the hierarchies of advanced beings and guides that exist within the higher timeline. And we also don't see the lower beings and the sort of more demonic levels of existence that are so anchored into the lower regressive timeline. There's a whole bunch of it that we can't see because we're so focused on the material level of reality that we just don't see it. But if we were to gain our clairvoyance back, we would clearly see two impulses. We would clearly see different beings incarnating from these impulses and being locked in these different timelines and expressing them on Earth. We'd see these different sort of contrasts going on very clearly, all right? And you would also see it within yourself. You would see it when you're tuning more into a lower timeline, and also when you're kind of tapping into a higher one, you would see it, okay? All right. So now we understand what timelines are. Okay, we can kind of get out of the idea of time as just this sort of linear thing, and we can see that there are several different timelines happening at once that we really opt into or out of based on our level of spirituality, based on our level of vril, or based on our level of consciousness, okay? And no matter where you are, you can always shift into one timeline or the other. Even if you feel you're at the depths of depression, and even if you feel like you're so lost and you feel like you're just at the bottom, living in the basement of your life, you can always shift, and you can always begin to lock into and tether into the Christ stream and be pulled into that higher timeline. It exists within all of us, and when we begin to go into the heart and we begin to pull that stream within us, we're automatically uplifted. We automatically become the alchemist. We automatically have the power within us to transform any trauma, any shadow. It is this light, this golden energy that exists within every single person. It is the philosopher's stone to transform themselves and return from this sort of fallen state that we are in. And this fallen state, which I may refer to various times in this presentation, is not something evil. It is something that we fell into a bit of a lower density, into the third density, to become masters. We came here to consolidate our wisdom and knowledge into a very pure form. To be alchemists, we came here for this. So this idea that humanity fell purely because of evilness and things like that, this isn't exactly true. This is what happens when society, when beings become so full of wisdom that they need to know that wisdom from all angles. And so they'll fall into a little bit of a lower density, or a lot bit of a lower density, so that they can see themselves from all different angles. And that's why it's denser, is because you're literally getting so many different views on this one stream. You're getting so many different views of yourself and on life, okay? So being in a denser reality, being in 3D instead of a higher reality, isn't some kind of punishment. It's not some kind of dark thing that we need to feel shame about or terror about. We're not in a prison planet. This is not reality. The reality is that we came here to be masters, and that we came here to use the Christ stream in our life as a power and a force within ourselves to overcome everything, and to use that stream to uplift us beyond even what we think that we can be. Okay, so we have to understand that this evolutionary force exists within us, and how powerful it is and how necessary it is, okay? And so let's touch now on how humanity evolves. Okay, so when I first sort of opened up this presentation, I was talking about how oftentimes in the New Age or in spirituality, but also in just various scientific conversations, and even in the ufology scene, you have very different ideas about how humanity has evolved. How does the human being evolve, right? Is it an internal thing or is it an external thing? So humanity actually evolves organically through the awakening of their DNA. So humanity evolves organically. Everything that you need to become a master, become a exalted spirit, is within you. It's always been within you, and it is a complete package. Okay, so basically within our DNA, it's sort of like Jacob's ladder, where we have the ladder back up to our 5D consciousness. We have the ladder back up to our 5D man, our pre-fall man, the pre-fall state, the higher state. That exists within us. There's nothing that we have to do in our life to add it or to fight for it or to get it from something. It's already within us, and it's a matter of awakening it. Okay? So how does this DNA awaken? How do we awaken our DNA? How do we awaken our DNA? Well, our DNA isn't just physical. There's a tendency within humanity at this time to see everything as physical. You know, to only look at the material side of things, and anything else is just non-existent. The reality is DNA is actually a multi-dimensional part of us, and it, like I said, it's a ladder, and it exists in many different dimensions of reality as different coded light. That's really what our DNA is. Okay, and how we begin to awaken our DNA is by building up vril, or chi, or ki, or prana, life force. That is how we actually awaken our DNA, as we begin to build up more and more chi, ki, in our body. And what it does is it actually allows us to contain more and more and more light. And that light pressurizes and awakens the DNA, kind of like pressurizing a diamond. Okay, and so what happens also is that we have a lot of dormant psychic circuitry, and I've talked about this pretty extensively in the my Isis Rising series. We have basically this psychic circuitry that is almost like going from larger veins to capillaries to very small, almost spiderwebby channels of energy that go all the way up into various different dimensions. And we can call that the energy body. It's an extension of the Nadi system in ancient India. And in Chinese medicine, you can also see these nadis. They actually extend into, just like the DNA, they actually extend into immaterialness. They actually become super sensible. They extend into all of the different dimensions and density, and it becomes kind of like a giant brain or a giant nervous system. And so the more light that we begin to bring into our body, really through awakening the heart is such a big part of this. But the more light that we begin to bring through our body and ground into our body, ground into our cells, the more we actually begin to awaken our DNA, the more we begin to awaken our soul within our body. And our body isn't just a physical force that is at odds with our soul or separate from our soul. It is completely enmeshed, and you can go through all the layers of your being seamlessly, okay? And in the Eastern traditions, these powers that you get from developing yourself in this way, these are called siddhis. These are called psychic superpowers, where the material body has become so informed by spirit, so informed by the Christ stream, that it is now dominant, and it can do whatever the spirit can do. matter now bends to spirit. And that's exactly what, when we're talking about Jesus Christ, we're talking about Jesus, the Master Jesus, when he transcended death, his body was just acting the way that his spirit would act. The spirit never dies. The spirit is always born again. It may change frequency, it may change form, but it never actually dies. Complete control over matter. So this is what happens when we awaken our DNA. This is what happens when we begin to hold more and more light. This is also called the body immortal in many traditions. And we've talked about this, I know, on my site here in different Q&As. We usually touch on it usually a couple times a month on the building of the body immortal, which is this bridge body that really acts as a bridge between the physical body and the spiritual body that we sort of build through channeling higher and higher, or bringing that energy deeply into our body so that it begins cycling in and building this higher form, okay, or anchoring this higher form into us, all right? So basically, how humanity evolves is through awakening a system that you already have within you, a system of ascension that you already have within you. And how you do that is through spiritual growth and spiritual development. And long ago, when this earth's spirituality really consisted of different sort of temple traditions or mystery schools, it was all about that. We didn't get caught up in, making gods of men or gods of people. We didn't get caught up in the myths. We didn't get caught up in all of these sort of material trappings, these dogmas as much. We just really focused on the actual mechanics of the soul. We focused on the actual metaphysics and how they work in the body and how we needed to store and manage energy to reunite with our higher self so that we weren't so separate from it in this material plane. That was what it was all about. It wasn't about all of the things that we see religion being about now. It was all about the genuine evolution of consciousness, okay? So different than what we see today, where many of the religions that we see are so far removed from the metaphysics that actually made the master, that actually made the avatar. And this is actually what we're missing. It is this level of the great avatars that we are missing, okay? So another way in which our DNA can activate, which is very interesting, is that through our life, we will actually be very much influenced by our past lives and our past incarnations and what we've achieved in them. So what will happen is we will be going through our life, and if we start to overlap an area in our life, in a past life, that we have achieved a great initiation, that we achieved something spiritually, where we lit up our DNA in a past life. Once we come back over this, in this life, the same age, maybe a similar circumstance, our DNA will begin to light up again. So it's not just like we're starting with this blank slate and whatever meditation we can do, whatever healing of trauma we can do, whatever calmness we can bring to our heart is kind of like what we get and we start over in every life. No. Your progress is stored within your being, within your etheric body, and even astral body and up. And what will happen is when you incarnate, you'll incarnate with that exact level of initiation in your being. And when you come back over certain times, certain people, certain experiences, you will be overlapping in resonance as well. And you will be caught on fire by your own initiation that you've been through. okay? So this is very similar to the idea of karma. And this is why we have these souls that can sometimes come onto this earth and they are incredibly, wildly talented, or they're incredibly spiritual, and it doesn't make sense. And then we go to school and we hear like the tabula rasa theory, where we're just born these blank slates and we're taught everything we know. This is not true. A great deal of who we are is already packed in the pudding. It's already here. It's already in our circuitry, in our consciousness. And we will experience the unfolding of it as we go. And we may choose to dive wholeheartedly into these initiations again in this life, or we may choose to deny ourselves of them. We do have a free will to go with it or to go without it. That is very, very true. But it is there. We are always building upon every life. And within our etheric body and our astral body are these codes that appear as different levels of activation within our DNA, within our being. And so this is why you may be listening to me right now and you may be like, you know, that kind of makes sense, because one day I was driving in my car and I just felt like this crazy download coming in, and it was like light filled me. And this feeling of peace, or this feeling of intense energy. We often call these sometimes spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, things like that. And I just felt like a different person or a new person. And I wasn't doing anything to necessarily trigger that or achieve that. It just kind of happened to me. It just happened to me. Well, no, you earned that. You earned that at some point in your soul's journey. You achieved something, and you were under the sun of your own consciousness speaking back to you. You did that. It's very important to have this realization, this knowing that it is within you, that you did that with you in every life, you were bringing this string of pearls, this string of achievements, and even deep periods of initiation, maybe even in incredible mystery schools or incredible mystery cultures of maybe Egypt, maybe Atlantis, maybe Mu, maybe Greece. They're in you. And your life now will give you this opportunity to awaken that and then go beyond it. Awaken to the level that you achieved in your last life and beyond. And this is how humanity evolves. Okay? And as I'm speaking about this, it's very clear that humanity evolves by this inward realization and through inner alchemy and through inner work, and that's that driving force. But we'll also see that there is a desire to draw humanity out of ideas that are empowering about their evolution and into this idea that humanity doesn't primarily evolve that way. That humanity needs external interference. That humanity's DNA needs to be externally upgraded through some kind of splicing. That it's not activated through pressure and through light and through this beautiful cosmic memory that we are all woven into, that we activate via our own chi, our own Christ within. No, we don't have it within. We need external help to do that. And you'll see both of these narratives in modern spirituality and in the New Age. You'll be presented with both truths, and you get to choose where you fall within them. But I can tell one thing about this externalization of our development. And it is that it does something very, very, very significant to our consciousness. It leaves a hole in it. If we believe that we are primarily influenced and evolving through external influence, through external manipulation, it leaves a hole in our consciousness that leaks our energy outside of us, that leaves our point of power outside of us. We have to understand that we can either primarily believe that we are complete, that we are divine, and that we have everything that we need to evolve. And through awakening our Christ stream, through our heart, we become the Philosopher's Stone. We can turn anything into gold. We can overcome anything and rise like a phoenix through the ashes. We can be reborn through no other mechanism than our own force. Okay? Anything external, we know, is a mirror of something going on external. It's not that the external world doesn't inspire us or affect us, but is external influence the primary mechanism of our growth? Because when we start to believe that it is, we start to believe that we need something external to evolve us. Maybe that our DNA needs to be modified. What does that do to our personal power? Okay, and we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this concept today, exploring this. Okay, and I want to know what you think in the comment section too. Don't be quiet. Let me know what you think of these concepts, and let me know any questions that are coming up in regards to this. Okay. So you cannot force a soul to evolve through any external means. You cannot create a body from exalted DNA and then incarnate yourself into that body and think that your soul is suddenly going to be advanced. It is the soul, the consciousness, that has a very specific pressure to it, very specific light, a very specific magnetism, a very specific intensity that controls your evolutionary process, including everything about your material world. Okay? So humanity evolves through healing their consciousness. We evolve through healing our consciousness, which in turn repairs spiritual pathways. As pathways reconnect, there is a buildup of life force energy, an intensifying of life force energy, an intensifying of vril force or life force energy. And this intensity finally gets us to a point where this more distant or more a little bit out there level of our DNA, a little bit of a higher frequency of the DNA can finally connect with the physical body, because it's finally resonating at a level that's close enough to it. Okay, we finally have this level of resonance within our more physical aspect that can finally start pulling in that higher light. And that in turn activates the DNA, and that is what brings in these advanced abilities, advanced clairvoyance, the ability to leap, the ability to move things with your mind. All of these incredible psychic abilities that we're amazed by are natural when we actually have the kind of spiritual power to do that. When we actually are channeling that power from our higher bodies into our lower bodies, because we've bridged our circuitry through healing and through alchemizing ourselves through the Christ stream that is within each and every one of us, that alchemical Christ stream, okay? That is the ascension process. That is the ascension of our consciousness. We're not leaving our body. We're not leaving. We are literally integrating our spirit into our being so closely through these now awakened esoteric pathways that we become like our soul. We move like it. We can do what it can do. Our third eye activates, and all different parts of our human body begin to function a little bit differently and come online. Our organs, everything. We regenerate, we rejuvenate. We can affect matter, we can affect crystals in ways that we only remember in Atlantis because of the amount of power that we can build up in our system, okay? So this is ascension. This is the ascension of the consciousness, the lifting of our consciousness back up. But again, we're not leaving our body, we're integrating it into the body. Ascension is integration, okay? And as we do this, we are coming full circle back to our 5D state, or what is also called our pre-fall state. The state that we were at before we fell into this very dense reality, this kind of darker, denser, heavier reality. We now come full circle back up into our pre-fall self, but with all of the wisdom of a descension and an ascension. And this is what makes us masters, okay? This ability to completely fall away from that 5D condition, that higher condition, that Christ condition, okay? Completely forget, completely lose yourself, fall into illusions, fall into darkness, make mistakes, and then go through that process of healing and moving back up. So the ascension is ascending from your fall, okay? And this is an internal process. It is not done through external hybridization, okay? We don't ascend through externally modifying ourselves. This is not how humanity ascends, okay? Ascension is the integration of spirit, not changing a physical form, hoping that if you change the physicality enough, it will eventually, you know, change the spirit. This is ridiculous, right? So externalizing humanity's evolution and spiritual development stops development, okay? So we have to be very aware of these themes to sort of externalize and outsource humanity's evolution, okay? These narratives about, you know, human origins and about how humanity has gotten where we are over the very long time that we've been on this planet, these are going to become major, major conversations in the next couple years. Because we are moving into this spacefaring society, because we are moving into a cosmic society, we have to be prepared for the sort of spiritual narratives that are going to come along with that, because it's not going to be the same spirituality, the same level of esoterica that we knew before we got to this level of cosmic consciousness in society, okay? All right. So we're going to go back to timelines now. Now that we understand how humanity genuinely evolves, and we understand sort of what a timeline is, you can tell that obviously you're going to be in a progressive timeline, an evolving timeline, if you're going through the natural organic DNA awakening process. You know, you're going through the process of shadow work, and that ascension process is part of the organic timeline, part of the progressive timeline on Earth. It's part of the ascension timeline, okay? And you can tell that if you're focusing maybe too much on external things, on materialism, if you're really focusing on the external world and you're a materialist at the expense of your spirit, obviously, you know, you're not going to be connecting with your soul in enough of a way where it can actually lift you into a higher state where you can heal. You're just going to be trapping yourself perpetually in a lower timeline and in a lower consciousness. And this is people's choice. It's kind of unfortunate that we have to talk about things in this way. I know that sometimes we don't want to talk about the dark side. We don't want to talk about the timelines that are de-evolving and what happens when we don't do the spiritual work. But we really do have to understand this, because society is so divided at this point that we have to understand why. And we have to understand why we can be sitting beside somebody and speak the same language but be totally unable to understand each other. Okay? Because we are at a point in time where these two timelines are becoming very distinct and very materialized. It's becoming very obvious at the end of this cycle where everything starts to congeal and everything starts to really form into matter. It's really obvious who is tapping into what and where people are coming from, okay? So one of the things that we also have to understand is that there are two different types of timelines, or two different ways that these timelines can sort of be described. One way that we can describe the lower timeline, the timeline that represents regression, or the timeline that really represents the lower breakaway civilization, that is called a divergent timeline. It's divergent. Why is it called a divergent timeline? Okay, because the organic timeline is the progressive timeline. The organic timeline is the ascension timeline. The organic timeline is returning back up into our Christ state, back into our higher condition after a fall. So the organic timeline is coming full circle. You're just following the natural flow back. You're not fighting anything. You're through your internal process of alchemy, you are just rising back into where you came from. That is the organic timeline. Okay. Then the lower timeline is a divergent timeline. Why is it divergent? Because it has missed an initiation in humanity. It had an opportunity for initiation. This timeline had an opportunity to grow. It was exposed to the same cosmic forces, the same experiences. The consciousnesses within this timeline experience the same forces that everybody else is. But those consciousnesses in that timeline made a different decision than the organic timeline. And that is that they chose to not open their heart. They chose to not connect with the Christ stream. They chose to not heal. They chose to not address the shadow, not address their karma. And they chose, instead of opening more and more and more and healing and surrendering to the force that is greater than us, but that is us, they said no. And it is that denial of the self, that denial of your own light, the denial of your own healing, the denial of your own Christ consciousness, that forces you into a divergent timeline. And this is outside of organic evolution. It's outside of the organic evolution of humanity. And so rather than ascend, there's a descension. Okay? This is also called the Antichrist timeline. And this is the consciousness in which the Antichrist emerges, the culture in which the Antichrist emerges. Christ is ascension. Your Christ consciousness is that force, that power, that pure crystalline light that lifts you back into who you are, who you have forgotten yourself to be. That force is within all of us. It is not just about a man, although when it is personified, we do tend to learn the most. We do tend to relate to it more. And it is very important, the avatar's personifications over time. But it is a force within you. Okay? When we deny that force and we say, I don't need to heal, I don't need to evolve, I don't need to look at myself. I don't need that. What happens? We devolve. Because we no longer have that life force energy that comes into our being and nourishes us and feeds us and inspires us and brings us our genius and brings us our light that we need to evolve and survive. We can choose to turn our back on that. And when we do, should we do that, we fall into what is called the Antichrist stream, and we are aligning with the Antichrist impulse. And in the cosmos, there is a Christ impulse that creates the Christ stream and its expression through time and everyone. And there is the Antichrist impulse, which is the expression of the anti-force. And when we're in that Christ stream, or we see that Christ, when we're in the Antichrist stream and we see the Antichrist force in the world, we see that it mimics and it mocks everything that is holy, everything that is good, not Christianity. This isn't about Christianity. This is the Christ energy and Christ consciousness is much, much bigger than Christianity. And it actually includes all religions through time. Okay? It is that alchemical force. It is the 5D energy within us. It is that pure force. So it makes everything that is holy, everything that is pure, it inverts it and it mocks it. This is what the Antichrist stream will naturally do. It will slowly invert and mock the Christ stream. It is the Antichrist stream. So it becomes the adversary, okay? So at the end of the day, why we tend to really turn our backs on ourselves and turn our backs on humanity and sort of go into this very regressive Antichrist stream and Antichrist consciousness is because we have too much fear. Okay, it's really, really, really important to understand this because it's so easy to kind of fill our hearts full of hatred for people who we feel are in this stream or what these people are doing to humanity. But we have to understand that the reason why is because they have so much fear and trauma in their system that when the light hits them and when they start to feel their heart open, it's too painful. Because that light will augment and magnify. First, it will augment and magnify the shadow in order to bring it to your attention in a glaringly obvious way so that you can begin to do the alchemy. So when we lose the tools for spirituality, when we lose the tools for alchemy, we lose our confidence in being able to deal with our shadow. And the fear will just build up in our system. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this in various different ways where, you know, you do periods of meditation and periods of spiritual development and you'll go into this really harsh depression or you'll go into this darker state. And it's because everything that has been forced out by you building up your beautiful Christ conscious energy in your being is pushing out that negative. I think it's called the Herxheimer effect. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on that one. But it pushes it out. But if you have it to a degree where you have no tools, you have no belief in yourself, and you're completely on a desert island with your belief system, you're completely alone in that, and then you have tons of fear, then you're going to run like heck from that Christ energy within you and also its reflections in the world. You will be repelled by it. Even if it is exactly what you need, the metaphysics of it will repel you. You will just be repelled by it. And so that's why this is such a tricky thing. This is why this is such a tricky thing to get our heads around, because it's like, how can someone not want to be in that stream? How can someone not want to develop their claircognizance and get downloads and learn to do incredible things with their mind and learn to heal themselves and learn to channel and just be like a super being? Why would someone not want to do that? Well, they do, but they can't because they don't do the work because of the fear that's inside of them, okay? It's a choice, but there is a distinct emotional alchemy that is so painful. It's at a point where it's so painful that they can't bring themselves to do it. But they still desire it. They still desire to be a God man, even though they're not connected to the very process, the consciousness within them that would allow them to do so organically. They still want that. They still want to be an exalted being, an exalted person, okay? And so why this is significant is because in our society, we see this push towards transhumanism. Transhumanism is the merging of man with machine. Okay? And this is the challenge of our time, is that there is a group of people on this planet, and also non-people, and also beings that exist within higher realms, that are part of the Antichrist impulse, that are part of the lower breakaway civilization, which are part of the lower timeline that is regressive, that are transhumanist. And they seek transhumanism because they believe it will make them God men, God women. They believe that they don't have to evolve organically. They don't have to reconcile their shadow. They don't have to face their fears. They don't have to take responsibility for anything that they've done to themselves or others, or understand any negativity that they found themselves in the Dark Age. They don't have to own that. Why? Their belief system, which we can get into in another day, says that they don't have to do that, that's just okay. It's just part of the world. But yet, they still deeply want that desire to be a God man, which means to have that intuition, to have invincibility, to live forever, to never die. But they're not doing it the way that Christ did it. They're not doing it through the healing process and those very important initiations that allowed spirit to become flesh and spirit to move as flesh and to completely spiritualize the body so that it can do anything the spirit can. They're not doing it that way. No. They believe that if they merge with machines, that they can never die that way. That if they can just merge with machines, that they can be incredibly psychic. Because if they merge with machines, they can tap into some neural link, some collective hive mind that is not the organic psychic development of tuning into the Akashic records. It is literally a collective hive mind from a lower form, written by man or written by a lower astral form. So they seek to achieve this godlike state through artificial means, through transhumanism. And artificial intelligence becomes a godlike presence. But the organic element is gone. The organic element fades. So even though they cannot connect with that alchemical Christ stream within them, they still seek it. But they are so distant from the consciousness that it takes to do it, that they do a cheap way. They try to do it externally, add these extra parts. Add a microchip here to the brain. I can just sort of insert my consciousness into a cube. I can live forever. This is the Antichrist impulse in mankind, and we need to understand that. Because there is a desire to not apply these impulses, both the Christ impulse and the Antichrist impulse, to modern times. We still refer to these different impulses and these different ideas as though it's 2,000 years ago, when we didn't even have a third of the technology that we have now. We cannot do that. We have to understand the modernized forms of these impulses and what they're doing and why. We have to understand the Antichrist impulse as a timeline. We have to understand the Antichrist impulse as a consciousness. And we have to understand the Antichrist impulse as groups of people, as an individual, as the Antichrist as an individual, just like we can have the Christ stream incarnate avatars. Okay? There can also be direct incarnations from the Antichrist stream. And in the world, it is these two impulses that give humanity the light and darkness to be who they are. But we can't really consciously choose who we are unless we recognize both of these streams in our life and its effect in modern terms. Because I realize that I'm talking about something that is associated with Christianity. And I know that that makes people feel defensive or uncomfortable because when you talk about Christ, it only has to be in certain terms, mainly terms that exclude all esoteric, real esoteric considerations. And when we exclude the esoteric considerations, we exclude being able to interpret them for this modern time. And that leaves us at a great lack, because that is exactly what we are being called to do. Okay? When we see the Christ stream as being that higher force, that golden higher force, it really kind of beams to us purely from the sun, and it contains all archetypes in complete harmony. When we can begin to work with that, that's an alchemical force. It's not just a man, it's an alchemical force that expresses itself in many different ways. Okay? And when we understand that, we can look at different things in our life. We can look at different things going on in the public and say, hey, okay, that is deviating from what I believe the Christ stream is or what it should represent. And we can make better choices. We can make very good choices when we start to view it this way, okay? So, what is a divergent timeline? What is a divergent timeline? A divergent timeline is a timeline where humanity broke away from the Christ impulse, from the organic evolution and ascension process of humanity. And this was due to opting out of responsibility and going down a regressive path, okay? This is due to avoidance. And that is the divergent timeline. It's outside of organic evolution. It is synthetic, and there is a direct manifestation of it on Earth throughout time. Throughout Earth's entire creation and evolution, there's always been this manifestation of this Antichrist impulse and this Antichrist timeline that forms around this Antichrist consciousness, this descending consciousness. There's so much language around it that we can use. Some is very religious, but some is just metaphysics, right? All right. So now that I'm saying that, I think the best thing that we can do is to sort of understand what an example of a divergent timeline. Now that we understand the metaphysics of it, we understand the esoterica of it, let's get into very, very specifically as to what a divergent timeline looks like, okay? So the most relevant example of a divergent timeline is the grays, okay? Many of you are already aware of the images of little gray beings with often really big black eyes that are associated with abducting people. In the New Age, there's a lot more acceptance for grays, and the story of the grays is very closely examined and talked about with different channelers. And the grays are interdimensional beings that interact with Earth, and they have a very specific journey, a very specific arc, a very specific timeline in connection with humanity. And we can best understand the grays as representing the divergent timeline or the Antichrist timeline. Why? Why do the grays represent that? Because that may actually offend people, because there are psychics and channelers who will connect or channel with the grays, and it becomes almost offensive. But I'm going to ask you to put any judgment or put that aside, because We have to understand that we are all here experiencing, okay? Whether we be a gray or Pleiadian or human, we're all here. We all have light, we all have shadow. And if we really honestly want to say that we are educated on what interdimensionals are here and why they're here and understand our connection to them, we just can't avoid what their shadow is. We just can't avoid what their darkness is, what their karma is, and only focus on light, okay? So the grays are the most relevant and the clearest example of what the divergent timeline is. Because the grays are humanity. The grays are a future version of humanity that failed. They failed this initiation that we are in right now. They failed the initiation and they went into full-blown transhumanism. And they became so involved in merging with machines and changing around their DNA, merging it with various animals, different things to survive, that they actually began modifying themselves so much through various forms, really just playing God with themselves, that they began to no longer be able to receive their life force energy. They began to no longer be able to build it up and connect with that God force because they were playing God with themselves so much that they just degraded to a point where they couldn't connect anymore, okay? And as a result, they began to die out. They reached a dead end within their civilization and they began to die out. They lost the ability to also reproduce. And the world that they were terraforming and the world that they had kind of created for themselves also began to die out. Because the funny thing is that the more you try to play God without actually merging with your higher self, without actually merging with the God force, the more material, the more dense you become, and the more dead you become. And so even though you cannot create or terraform a world or create a body from this level of consciousness that we have, from this more deeper, lower density of reality, we cannot create a world or a being. Only if we are completely aligned can we play a part in the creation process. Okay, see how there's a difference there. Okay, so these beings were playing God and they fell into what is known as the beast system. Okay, so when you look at the grays and you look at their story, you are literally looking at a divergent timeline. You're looking at a group of beings now. They actually don't resemble us to such a degree that we call them alien. Many people have such terrifying experience with them, they don't even think that they're human. So this is so divergent from the organic system that we know and that we function in, okay? So you can imagine if you've done this, if you're part of the gray civilization, you've modified yourself to such a degree that you're dying out and that you're literally not going to really exist anymore. And what they did is they began to trace it back and figure out, where they went wrong, and they did the work on it. And they realized that it was really transhumanism and that failed initiation that we face now that really messed them up and that set them on this tone to be divergent and aligning with that Antichrist regressive impulse. And so they then believed that if we can go back to that time, and these technologies do exist, these time travel technologies or interdimensional technologies, and they had a great amount of technology. Like they had the grays have a lot of technology, just not a lot of spirituality, not a lot of real, not a lot of life force. It's like if you can imagine having tons of ability to use machines and technology, but no ability to raise Kundalini, the Kundalini system completely damaged, right? So what they decided to do was, hey, we're going to go back to the time just before we chose to be transhumanist. And we are going to take the DNA and we are going to try to fix and heal our forms from the damage that we have done. And so this is why we see all of these abductions going on and why they took all of this genetic information from humanity, why there's so much, you know, even weird reproductive stories and rape stories and all this kind of really dark and weird stuff that's been going on since, like, you know, pretty much around World War II onward. This was all gathering genetic information so that they could heal themselves from the mistakes that they made by choosing to go into the Antichrist timeline and choosing the transhumanist path. Okay. And so what's really interesting is that the grays presented themselves as a spiritual force to humanity. So back when humanity was still doing, you know, seances and, you know, channelers were channeling and things like that, there were gray entities that were interdimensionals that presented themselves as very exalted, masterful, higher beings. Okay, and they used false light to do this. So here we have beings of the Antichrist impulse that are presenting themselves as Christ. They're presenting themselves as beings from the Christ stream, even though they're from the Antichrist stream, even though they're from the regressive transhumanist timeline. Okay, here we come. Here we see that mockery. Here we see that inversion. The reason why they did this is that they knew that if humanity, they could never just tell humanity what they had done. They could never just tell humanity, hey, you know, we made a mistake, we destroyed ourselves, and now we need your genetic information to heal, so give it up, hand it over. No, they tricked humanity into having seances, connecting with them. They gave them technology. And certain groups on the planet just went head first into these contacts because the gray interdimensional beings that were contacting secret societies and these various people, they really chose to contact secret societies and people that were of power, okay? And so they went head first into these contacts because they were filling in the gaps of certain very powerful technologies that they could have. Okay, things like maybe the atomic bomb or something like that. But very advanced technologies, very advanced ideas that good forces or beings that were in the Christ stream would not fill in those gaps because they did not feel that humanity was ready. They did not feel like humanity was mature enough. And so you have this direct dichotomy going on where there were groups on the planet, and there have been for a very long time, but there were groups in the modern day, because we're talking about the modern day Christ stream, the modern day Antichrist stream. We're not talking about it from, say, 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago. We're talking about how it manifests today in a techno-advanced civilization. And so we have these two forces, and they're communicating with humanity, and you have beings coming from the Christ stream that are teaching about going inward and building up your life force and how to ascend and spiritual techniques and healing, self-empowering, know thyself. Great masters, great adepts coming here and teaching from that higher stream, but they do not focus on giving people technology or on helping them build devices as much, okay? And then you have the Antichrist stream coming in, and beings from the Antichrist stream, consciousness is coming in from the Antichrist stream that need to prey on humanity. And so they gave them all these different sort of technologies that they may want to basically almost take over the world, take over the planet. Give them the edge so that they could become dominant, okay? Because remember, in the Antichrist stream, one of the most prominent mindsets is might is right. If I can dominate you, if I can make you look like a fool, if I can dominate you, then you deserve it. Because might is right. Survival of the fittest, okay? I can be an absolute terrible person, and if I can get away with it, it's clearly because I deserve it. It's clearly because I'm smarter than you, and it's clearly because I am dominant. This is the Antichrist impulse. That is how it looks in humanity. It looks like domination. It looks like I don't care about anything or anyone. I have no empathy. I have no compassion. I have no virtue. If I can dominate you, if I can take your energy, if I can set up an entire system on the planet that is a parasitic system, then you deserve it. If you can't beat me, you deserve it. This is the consciousness that we are dealing with today. And it is the Antichrist consciousness, make no mistake. And it is might is right. And it is survival of the fittest. And it is so, so, so different, ladies and gentlemen, to the Christ stream, to your inner Christ, to your Christ consciousness and what it moves out of you, what it does, what it says, what it teaches, is that when we move into a space of love, when we move into the heart chakra, we all move together and are stronger. It says when we move in love and compassion and forgiveness, we can form a higher society by raising our frequency so much that we're actually completely uplifting ourselves into another dimension and density together, where nobody is necessarily dominating anybody else, but there are certainly teachers and wise people and people learning, but there is a ability to connect under the understanding that we are all part of God. No one is trying to be God within the Christ stream, despite what you may have been taught to believe about it. When you are in that stream, you're not trying to be God. You're not saying might is right. You're not saying survival of the fittest. You're saying when you rise, I rise. When you heal, I heal. That is what the Christ stream says. The Christ stream says when you wake up and when you rise and when you remember who you are, the world is better. When you are on fire, you will light others on fire, and we can rise together, and you can channel your unique piece of the cosmos within you. And you can contribute in a way that nobody else can, and that is needed and that is necessary. That is 5D consciousness, and that is a 5D society when we can understand that. It is not to dominate people, to say might is right. That ain't it. To lock people into some bizarro transhumanist form so they can control your mind and consciousness. This is sickness. This is the sickness of the Antichrist stream that we are facing today. And that is what is meant by the Antichrist. It is a completely different paradigm. Okay? And so back to the Greys. The Greys posed as spiritual leaders, as advanced beings, and gave technologies and posed themselves as a god, but it is an AI god, because what did they do? They became AI beings. They became completely taken over by transhumanism. So that is what they could offer, right? If they were really here to help, if they were really there to help, they would have told mankind, do not go down the path that we did. Do not do that because we have suffered. And look where we are. And yet I have yet to hear one channeler of gray beings teach that. Here we are at the precipice of losing ourselves into an antichrist force, into a negative timeline, and the very beings that suffered from that do not warn us about it, but rather continue often to show themselves as Messiah-like figures, or associate them as spiritual leaders, or associate themselves as above us. We have to start wondering why. And now I'm not saying that maybe there aren't some hybridized gray beings out there, or some people that have overcome this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that every single being that looks like a gray is like this. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that for some reason, this extremely important narrative for humanity is completely left out of the equation in the starseed movement, and with a lot of channelers and a lot of different psychics. And for me, I find that to be a very big hole. And I think that it makes it so we have to put more pressure on these connections so that we can understand them, okay? So it's really interesting. The Greys began to communicate with humanity to exploit it. They didn't really care if humanity was evolving or not. They just wanted to basically take humanity's DNA, their genetic information, so that they could basically not die and not die out. That's the fundamentals of it. They had to give them something in return. So they gave them technologies and were working with actually shadow groups, shadow secret societies, aspects of even the shadow government and things like this. They were working with them over a long period of time to actually build up certain technologies or find certain technologies. So it wasn't just like a short period of time. There was the building up and preparing of these people to usher in these technologies and usher in transhumanism, okay? So one of the interesting things that also really brings this home, that we can really connect this idea of who the Greys are, what the Antichrist impulse is if we were to take that whole thing and we were to say, who alive today? What groups today would be the modern version of the Greys? Okay, what groups today would be the modern version, knowing what we know? Well, that would be the transhumanists, and also the globalization folks, so the individuals that basically want to consolidate all power, consolidate all human beings, and basically rule the world. Okay, it is this group, and it is the secret societies and the black magicians. It is that whole part of society that essentially moves into and evolves into what we know as the Greys. So this is not a distant concept to us. This idea of devolving, this idea of a lower timeline for humanity. This is not a foreign idea. It's not an esoteric idea. We can look in our society today and we can say, okay, well, if black magicians and dark magicians that are also techno-spiritual, that are making these sort of advanced technologies that are pro-transhumanism, that have made transhumanism a type of weird spirituality, these are the people that would evolve into what we know as the Greys. These are their progenitors, okay? This is not a distant concept. We can look on our earth today very closely and we can see where that Antichrist impulse is, okay? Okay, and this whole thing, this whole merging with humanity, taking DNA from human beings, it's not just about the DNA. it's not just about them getting enough DNA and then they can leave the planet, or they can somehow maybe, you know, connect with humanity again, or anything like that. This is an ongoing process. And the last step, or the next step in this process, is actually being accepted back into humanity. So the first step of the Greys was basically to make a connection with humanity, and in exchange for technologies, access DNA that they wanted. And this went on for decades. Once they got to the level on our timeline where they got the DNA they wanted, the next step is to actually begin to emerge back with society. Okay, they want to begin to merge back with humanity. They want sort of back in. And this is where they want to kind of almost completely hybridize themselves back into basically where they fell from. Okay, and it's very important that we know this. It's very important that we understand that they're trying to heal their process of descension and their process of their fall by forcefully reintegrating themselves into a society, okay? That's really what is going on. And the Greys, as I mentioned before, are part of that divergent timeline. Divergent because, again, by all intents and purposes, they're deformed. Okay, when you put a Grey next to a Grey from the Divergent timeline next to a human being, an organic human being that never took that divergent path, you would have the organic human would just look like a human being, but with intense virile power. Okay, they may have a different stature or have certain ways that they look, but they have so much intense virile power because their soul is so deeply woven into their body. But there's nothing deformed, and that's why a lot of people say that, you know, angels can walk among us, or these higher beings can walk among us, and we wouldn't necessarily know by looking at them, because they're not part of a divergent timeline where they would be deformed in any way. They didn't diverge, they just took the organic path and focused on the inner work of merging spirit with the physical body. And a lot of the incredible advancements are unseen, okay? So we have the higher breakaway civilization that is the expression of the Christ impulse. We have the lower breakaway civilization, which is an expression of the Antichrist impulse, and that is regressive. And the Grey beings are the best example of a divergent timeline that we have, because they literally are humanity. They literally are the timeline of humanity that took the path of the Antichrist. They took the divergent path. They lost their form to the degree that they had to burrow their way back in time to take their genetic information back from humanity. Okay? So Grey beings are from a divergent timeline that failed this ascension cycle, which means they have no ability to spiritually initiate humanity. This is a really important part, actually. The only beings, interdimensional, or just human beings that actually have the power to initiate humanity are those that are on the organic timeline. Those that are from the Christ stream, that are connected with that stream, okay? If there's beings from a divergent timeline, they may be interesting. You may enjoy learning about it. You may be fascinated by it. But those beings do not have the power to spiritually initiate humanity, to spiritually uplift humanity. They do not have the codes. They actually have less codes. They actually have less capacity, less vril, less psychic circuitry activated. That's why they had to go back in time and take genetic information from humans. because they had to try to get back to the level of power that we are at. We are actually more powerful psychically and vril-wise. We are actually more powerful than the Greys. We may be unawakened. It may not be lit on fire, but fundamentally we are more powerful, okay? We have more potential. They're spent. So a lot of what they do actually is technology. A lot of the psychic stuff they do is actually mind technology. And it only works on people who are really entrained to that level, okay? Very important to know this. Only beings from the organic timeline and the Christ impulse can initiate humanity, because why? Because they've gone through the process of the fall and the rise, the ascension, and that whole process means that they've overcome. They've overcome something. They've come full circle. In their bioenergetic field, it means that they had psychic pathways that went dark and they separated from them, but then they ended up building them back. They ended up being reinitiated into their light. They ended up creating gold. They ended up regaining their consciousness. And it is that alchemical regaining of one's consciousness that is full of the codes of initiation of humanity. These are specific frequencies. The great initiators of mankind can hold a very specific frequency in their body and entrain you to it. And you don't even realize it's happening, okay? You don't even realize it's going on. It is completely energetic. And what's happening is these codes are being passed to you from that person's real power that they are generating to your body. And that is going in and that is awakening you, massaging you, flowing within you. And that is what an initiator is. It's not the words that they say. It is the exchange of energy that is going on. And in order to do that, in order to entrain someone, in order to do this, that person has to have a lot of vril built up in their system, a lot of life force energy, a lot of power, okay? And that power comes from the ascension process. The ascension process is full of vibrational codes every step you go. You regain them and you vibrate them outward. It is the reconciliation of the light from the shadow. You can only have these if you overcome your shadow. You can only have these if you take on the initiation. You can only have these if you align with your Christ consciousness and allow it to transform you. And then your field becomes full of what? The understanding of the problem. Ooh, you get it? You get the problems of the world because you've been there. But also the overcoming of them. So you have empathy, compassion, wisdom. Okay? Only when you come full circle do you begin to have the codes and can you begin to initiate other people into that level in which you've mastered. Divergent timelines that have interdimensional beings that have not achieved this initiation that we face cannot initiate you back to anything. They cannot offer you the codes of overcoming because they don't have them, because they chose, when they stood here today as we do, as we are, they chose not to heal. They chose the divergent timeline and they deformed themselves. They cannot initiate humanity. So that may be interesting to talk about. It may be interesting to look into, and maybe there is some conversations around integrating the pain or whatever it is, but that's not nearly as important as understanding that not all interdimensionals are the same. Not all higher beings are the same, because some have actual codes that you can entrain with because they have levels of that Christ stream integrated in them. And there are some that have none of that and that are completely parasitic and actually wish to take your life force from you, or to trick you into false realities, to take your life force from you because they're so deficit. They have none of it left, okay? So it's very important to know that unless you're on that path of organic evolution within the Christ impulse, there is no codes within your being to initiate you, to initiate other people. You have to earn that ability. Okay, you have to relight it up within your system, okay? So the grays represent the Antichrist impulse and what happens to humanity under the beast transhumanist system. Okay? Very, very interesting to see that we have this glaring example of what it is. All right? And they seek to correct their mistakes by presenting themselves as advanced beings, parental, progenitors, or as savior beings. That's the next step. The next step is that these beings that are of the Antichrist impulse have to introduce themselves as saviors. And that gives them permission to be here, to continue to be here, to continue to set up structures that are based on might is right and parasitic impulses. Okay? And this also continues to secure these beings with access to humanity, access to DNA, access to a world that they actually no longer really deserve. They have to do the work like everybody else, okay? There's no shortcuts. All right, we're going deep today. Hope I have enough time to cover everything that I want to cover today. How are we doing out there? Do you guys have the energy? Okay, so I see some questions coming in. Good, good, good. All right. So now that we've discussed what a synthetic timeline is or what a divergent timeline is, let's now touch on what an organic timeline is. Let's go deeper into what that Christ stream is. Okay? So the organic timeline is the completion of a cycle. Okay? And on the organic timeline, humanity evolves organically and rises and ascends back into their pre-fall state. Okay, and it really represents the completion of a cosmic cycle. That's really what the organic reality is. It just means that you're not diverging and you're just riding with the cosmos all the way through. You're not playing God, really. And the way that you move through this is through developing your higher consciousness, okay? And how we develop our higher consciousness is through aligning with the Christ impulse inside of us, okay? And this is through the heart. And as we do this, we are healing our karma, we heal our shadow, we heal our individual shadow, we heal the collective shadow, and we really begin to fall back and lean into God. That's the most important thing to understand about the Christ impulse, is that we realize that we are not alone. That inside of us is everything that we need. We just have to get our head out of the way and fear out of the way. And then we begin to fall very naturally into our true self, and we begin to transform, and that becomes the engine of spiritual evolution. Okay? And this also involves the healing of the planet. So a lot of the Antichrist impulse in society says that they're going to heal the planet, that they want to have all these solutions for healing Gaia, but it doesn't really represent the spiritual connection and symbiosis that we have with her, and how humanity needs to live in a state of symbiosis with the mineral kingdom and the plant kingdom. There's no real spiritual discussion about that. It's really more about maybe money going to certain places, or it's more political, but also the awakening of the Christ consciousness within the human also is the Christ consciousness within the planet as well. So again, it's that beautiful multidimensionalness where it is personal, but we also do it collectively, okay? And the other aspect is that it is overcoming materialism. We begin to overcome materialist science, and we begin to release this addiction to finding pleasure in the material world and constantly leaning into the material world, we begin to let that go, and we begin to finally turn back into the inner world after a very long time of living an outward life. And so that's a huge portion of what this consciousness does to us, is it leads us back to ourself. Okay, and we realize that, as we were talking about in the beginning of this stream, that we are the engine of evolution. Our inner being is the engine of evolution. Okay, and as this happens, we will see we'll see ourselves leave domination-based leadership behind, might is right leadership behind, and we begin to leave the idea that we have to have parents or that we have to have saviors that come. We begin to leave that behind, okay? When we lean into our Christ consciousness, we leave these ideas behind. These are really the ideas that represent the Antichrist, okay? The idea of an external savior, the idea of might is right, that whole thing, okay? And the example of an organic timeline, because now we have to go into exactly what an organic timeline looks like, because we already discussed what the divergent timeline looks like, which was the grays. So what does an organic timeline look like? Well, the organic timeline is the ascension timeline of humanity. And if you were to say, you know, what kind of being, what kind of human would embody this? The grays embody the divergent timeline. Then what is the organic timeline? Well, they would look like, basically like you would see a human. They may have a more glowing aura. You may sense more of a presence around them. You may sense a very palpable spiritual power around them, but they are human. Okay, there's no diverging. They're just evolved superhumans or advanced humans. Sometimes you call them future humans. And there is some conversations around the superhumans and the future humans coming from the inner earth and Shambhala. And also they can sometimes be called Pleiadians or Venusians. And the reason why they're called Pleiadians or Venusians is because how interdimensional beings will often associate themselves is through their level of initiation or through the name of their earth. So earth actually has many different names as it goes through different densities. And we've discussed this in Isis Rising when we talked about Venus being a layer of earth, like a higher density earth. And so sometimes they'll call themselves that, but it doesn't actually necessarily mean that they're coming from physical Venus. They're coming from the Venusian sphere, or they're coming through the Pleiadian sun. And when they say this, they're revealing their level of initiation to you. But because our consciousness is so external, and we always take everything as being so material, we automatically think that it is like an external being visiting us, and that's not exactly the case, okay? Okay, we have to understand that the earth exists in different densities, and that there are different spheres that overlap the earth, and the suns in the sky are actually stargates, and consciousness can move through them and come through various spheres, but also perhaps identify with the stargate or maybe identify with the sphere more. But when they say this, they're revealing their level of initiation. They're revealing the time in which they're from and how they relate to us, okay? And traditionally, we would also understand that the beings that come from this organic timeline, that come from that stream of Christ consciousness, we understand these beings as avatars. These are the great teachers. So we have, Jesus Christ, we have the Buddha, and other also highly gifted individuals that may not have achieved the level of avatar, but are still part of that stream, but are at various phases of evolution, okay? But when the Christ stream personifies, it's a really incredible thing. And it doesn't completely personify often. These are called the world teachers or the great avatars, okay? So when the Christ, so there's, as the planet evolves, okay, it moves through different densities of consciousness, and time rolls on. So we kind of go like through a, kind of like this, like a sine wave, right? And what happens is there's certain points where great avatars will come, where great teachers will come. And they'll come, and they are often associated with the sun, because the sun is the controlling stargate that leads us into 3D. And it represents the ascended path from 3D to 5D and mastering and overcoming that chaotic 4D state, okay? So what happens is they begin to incarnate at certain times, okay? So you have these great avatars coming in, often associated with the sun. And what they'll do is they'll come and they will personify the next stage of evolution for humanity. So what you'll have a series or a string of teachers coming in. And at a very distinct point, you'll get an extremely pure expression or a complete personification of ascension for humanity. That was the Buddha, and then it was Christ's turn, and then of course there will be other avatars, okay? But these beings are coming from where? So you got the sine wave down here. We're moving through time and density, right? And then you have this beautiful consciousness that's called the Christ stream or the Christ consciousness. And everybody has different aspects of their soul that's pulling from that, different degrees. And then you have some beings that have extremely high levels of that come in to the point that they can be the complete personification of the sun, complete personification of 5D for that time, taking on every issue that humanity has that on that time within their body, within their being, solving it and contributing it to humanity. Okay, this is what the great teachers do. And then there's, of course, many other teachers and amazing beings that come in and that will work in line with that. But they all are really incarnating through and from the Christ stream, okay? So it's really important that we know that the Christ stream is organic, and no matter where you are, it is connecting with that pure form, that it has that individual element, that it can be individuated for a time, and that it can also be within you, and that means there is that master element in you that you can become. They're just the example of that. And then it can also be groups, or it can also be vast consciousness, okay? So this is all how that organic timeline expresses itself, the ascension timeline. This is all part of that. And there's a breakaway civilization, what you would call a breakaway civilization, that is plugged into 3D Earth, okay? And then it weaves back up into Christ consciousness, into 5D. And there's levels of beings at various consciousnesses that are within that, like a bridge from 3D to 5D and up. But they're all anchored in the Christ stream. They all incarnate from that. They all reference that. They're all integrating that. They're all teaching that. And various stages of integration, because remember, in the beginning of this presentation, we discovered that we carry every initiation that we have within our soul, and we activate our bodies based on that. Okay? So this is why you can have some beings come in that have this incredible potential. Okay? So, yeah. I'm trying to be mindful of your time today, but I have so much to say. Again, the Christ stream is also associated with our sun, which is the 5D stargate, which is really important to understand that, because the sun represents the completed game. The sun represents the completed consciousness, as we talked about in Isis Rising. Everything is complete, okay? Everything is perfected. It's full circle. And that's why many people worshipped the sun. And there were sun gods. And if you want to go really, really, really far back, there are different suns, okay? But they're all completed. And that's why, that's the esoteric reason why many gods or goddesses are associated with the sun, with fire, okay? So they're human, but the only difference is they have immense energy and immense abilities. Okay, they've overcome the shadow age or the dark age. They have no nanites, they have no chips. They never sought that external way of evolution, or if they did, they overcame it by connecting with that inner force and overcoming it, okay? And these civilizations also have a different technology. And this is very important in regards to the breakaway civilizations that I've been speaking about. Because, again, these are not just spiritual wispy beings that communicate with us telepathically. No. These are beings that walk the earth, that have walked the earth, that walk the earth now, that are emissaries of this stream, of this higher stream, just like there are people that are of the Antichrist stream that walk the earth that are emissaries of that stream. And they have very different technologies, they have very different cultures, they have very different lives, and but they each have a very physical existence. The Christ stream is alive and well on the planet. Okay? It's not just spiritual. There are people that are here that are directly connected to that, and they work with that and for that, and they never left, okay? Same thing with the darker stream. And one of the things is that the higher Christ stream works symbiotically with technology, with minerals. So things like crystals, and the crystalline technology of Mu and Atlantis. This is more of the Christed technology because it was really before we fell. A lot of the technologies that we see that will come forward with the introduction of the disclosure projects that are going on and whatnot, a lot of those technologies are actually very dirty technologies. They're the equivalent of like having a really dirty burning diesel truck or something. These are not symbiotic higher technologies where you're merging with the cosmos, you're merging with minerals, you're merging consciousness with people organically. These are really harsh technologies that may seem like they're free energy or doing something with magnetism or what have you. They may actually connect with your will to a certain degree or your mind to a certain degree, but they are very heavy. They're extremely heavy and they're more external and they rely more on external forces to run. Whereas the higher societies, the higher civilizations have more succinct technologies that are based in symbiosis with the mineral kingdom and symbiosis with things rather than trying to control and distort things. So even though as we move forward in society, we are going to see, you know, all these various technologies introduced to us in the coming years, we have to understand that there's a difference between these high-tech technologies, okay? We can't just be blown away because we're using fossil fuels. Still, we have to know there's a difference between them, okay? Because even to the degree that they can affect your mind and stuff like that, okay? Again, with the, another thing that I have to say about the organic timeline is that they can energetically initiate humanity. So again, this is the breakaway civilization. This is the, these are the beings and people that have the codes of evolution, okay? They have the codes within them. They are the progressive breakaway civilization, okay? All right. All right, so let's compare and contrast a little bit of what we've been talking about just so that we can really understand, all right? So these varying streams can also be seen as being organic life and synthetic life. Organic life and the organic timeline of consciousness lives in symbiosis. It doesn't try to dominate it. It seeks to find a harmony, okay? The lower timeline, the Antichrist timeline, is all about synthetic life. It's about dominating things. It's about playing God. And this is the force in society that wants to make everything fake. You know, they want GMOs all over the place. They want to create all of these different things in laboratories with no consideration as to how it will affect, you know, life in the long term. Okay? Organic life aligns and harmonizes with God, with the earth, with humanity, with our higher self. It's about harmony, okay? And eventually using will to influence that, but with the whole in mind, okay? The Antichrist timeline, the lower breakaway civilization, is about dominating to the degree that they think that they're being gods by creating all of these weird synthetic things, including synthetic versions of themselves, including synthetic AI, cyborgs, and robots, because they believe that they are creating humankind. I'm just going to stop for 1 second, because some people may think by hearing this, by hearing me speak this way about technology, that I'm a Luddite, or that I'm anti-technology, or that I'm advocating for technology to stop moving forward. That is not my position at all. I think that I think that technology is wonderful for mankind, and I think it's necessary for mankind. And I would even go as far to say that perhaps developing AI is part of humanity's path, and that it can be done in a way that is very healing, that's very nurturing. But that is not what I'm seeing being offered to humanity at this time. I think that we need to put more effort into understanding the dangers of this. I think that it's moving forward much too fast at the expense of a lot of people who do not understand what's going on and who are not educated, and I think it's predatory. And so it's not that humanity at large is bad. We have to evaluate where every single person is in society, where society is at large, and if they're ready for this. You can't just force a culture forward, dominating it, forcing things on it without consenting with people. You can't just introduce frequencies to, you know, all of these frequencies into our atmosphere, all of this technology that breaks up our bioenergetic field, changes how our mind functions. You know, that's not a loving thing to do. That is what somebody who practices might is right does. They can dominate you, then so be it. This is not the way society moves forward, okay? This is what I'm talking about. It is that impulse. It is technology created from that impulse that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the higher technologies that I've talked about that are based on symbiosis and that are based on respecting human beings and their level of development, because I'll tell you what, humanity needs to spiritually develop right now, more than anything, more than technologically. And that's where the focus should be, okay? I just wanted to be clear about my position, because sometimes people will misunderstand me and think that I'm like, I just think we should go back into the Stone Age, and that's absolutely not. I'm using technology now. I'm definitely not anti-technology. I'm just anti-technology from the Antichrist impulse, okay? Big difference. The other phase, the organic life, is direct. There's no diverging from God. There's no diverging from the Christ impulse. We're moving with the cosmos, all right? You know, and then the divergent impulse is playing God and moving away from themselves. The organic side is ascending humanity. The synthetic side is descending humanity. The organic side is the high 5D path. The descending is the lower path. You guys are getting this. Higher Earth, 5D Earth, lower Earth, okay? Higher Earth is through aligning with the Christ impulse, lower Earth with the Antichrist impulse, okay? All right. All right, so now we're going to get into part 2, which is significantly shorter. I'm just going to see if I have any questions about what I came. Okay, so I'm going to just take a member question. When we fell from 5D to 3D during Atlantis, was that due to an Antichrist impulse? This is a great question. Yes, it is. In Edgar Cayce's work, And Edgar Cayce is the psychic that has done the most extensive Akashic work around Atlantis, and has a great foundation in which we can pull from on the dynamics of Atlantis. And also in my own work, there is a very clear Antichrist force in Atlantis, a very clear descending force. And this force in the Cayce work is called Belial. It is called the Belial force. And it goes up against the positive force that in our time would be the Christ force, which is the Emilius force. So these two impulses existed even in Atlantis. Even in Atlantis, these two impulses existed and interacted. Okay? And the Belial force, or the dark Antichrist force of Atlantis, it started to become just like it is now. It became obsessed with power and control and turning technologies that were once used in that symbiotic way to connect people and to connect with higher realms. It turned them into lasers. It turned them into war machines. It turned them into ways in which we could dominate one another rather than uplift each other. And this happened when Atlantis was sinking into that dark age. Okay, these descension cycles happen in dark ages when there's less cosmic light. And so whoever has not been doing the work will sometimes fall into that Antichrist impulse, right? Because they're not getting that light externally anymore. They haven't built it up, and so they start to fall due to their own lack of work, okay? So yeah, they absolutely happened in Atlantis, and the fall of Atlantis is exactly where we are now, where we're facing this initiation, where there is a very strong Antichrist impulse, and this opportunity to use technology improperly again. And there are people and beings on the planet now that are putting the same type of narratives, the same type of techniques, the same type of control onto humanity that happened in Atlantis. We are facing the same thing, but in a lower density. So people always say, you know, isn't America parallel to Atlantis? Isn't our time parallel to Atlantis? Absolutely. But it's hard sometimes to line it up psychically because it is in a little bit of a different density. And we can often only grasp at the aspects of Atlantis that were closer to our density, okay? And I'm going to do one more question, and then I'm going to get back to the presentation, and then I'm going to take your questions at the end, okay? So what can one do to overcome any Antichrist programming and to live continually in the Christ-like state? The first thing is to be easy on yourself. And, you know, when we think of Christ in our modern consciousness, we think of this perfected state and this just incredible level of perfection. The one thing to understand is that we don't have to get there in one life. So don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect, all right? It is an energetic thing. It is fundamentally an energetic thing. So watch your mind, okay? Watch the thoughts that you're thinking. Notice how your thoughts can nourish you and feed you, and then also how they can deplete you of energy. And they can tell you that you're not your thoughts can tell you that there's nothing special about you. Your thoughts can tell you that you're a loser. Why try? Why bother doing what I'm doing? What's the point? Your thoughts can tell you that you are crap, or they can be rooted in love, and they can say, you know, you're having a hard time now, but at the end of the day, I am divine. And you can align with that energy. You can have loving thoughts or more fearful thoughts. It's very cliche, but if you were to align energetically with the Christ force, it is the force of love. It is generating peace in the body. It is generating a sense of awe or reverence in the body. It is smiling with every cell. It is that level of peace, that level of a little bit of upliftment maybe, but that level of heart peace. The mind isn't coming in. And the great teachers, if you take the Buddha, if you take Christ and you look at their true teachings, you will find the path to your Christ consciousness. That was the whole point. That was the whole point. Whether it be Buddha's beautiful work on observational meditation, where really building the force within, or whether it be Christ's focus on action and how to be. Beautiful teachings. They're here for us. But remember that it comes down to where your energy is rooted. Always create every single day. Make sure you're meditating and building peace in your system, because your DNA really activates and pulls you into that Christed energy when you can match it, which means that you are peaceful, okay? Which means you are taking time every day, no matter where you are, to be still. You don't have to eradicate negative emotion. You don't have to say it never exists. You just have to be able to be with it, to not separate from it, to not try to dominate it, to not try to control it. You have to work with it and know how to bring in the virtues of acceptance, forgiveness. The teachings are there for us. We just have to have the discipline and bravery to carry them out, okay? So I'm going to come back in and do the last little bit of this presentation, and then I'm going to come into your questions, okay? So I want to come back into this idea about internal evolution versus external evolution. We just went very deeply into organic timelines and divergent timelines, and the types of people or the types of beings that come from these two very different timelines. So one of the things, especially I think in society, that we're going to face is really what I would say misinformation from the Antichrist, that Antichrist stream. And I see it all the time, as I mentioned in the beginning of this stream, which is that there's this incredible desire to say that human beings are primarily just externally created. And there's no recognition of their divine nature, and that the human body physically formed over a very long period of time, adjusting to various densities so that souls could incarnate in, okay? So here are some common questions about human beings that align with our conversations today. Is humanity a natural, divine human being that its form is created by descending into matter? So basically a spiritual form or a less dense form that becomes denser and denser and denser over time, and the soul becomes more and more refined as it goes down. Okay, it's a natural formation, right? Or were we fundamentally or primarily created by an outside parent civilization? Which one is fundamentally true? Does humanity primarily evolve through inner alchemy, through spiritual evolution? Or does humanity primarily evolve through interference from outside forces at various stages? Which one does humanity primarily evolve through? Okay. In the second half, we're also going to address what is hybridization. Hybridization is something that we hear a lot about in the New Age scene, in ufology, and, all over. What is hybridization? And is it really possible? Okay. And what is the role of hybridization in humanity? And we're also going to, at the end, we're going to talk about some myths about our great avatars and whether they are hybrids or whether they are not. Okay? So we are facing this example of external versus internal stimulus as humanity's evolution. And one really good example of this conversation in the public sphere is someone named Zecharia Sitchin. Okay, Zecharia Sitchin's work was incredibly popular, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And if you were in the ufology community or the New Age community, you would not be able to click around unless and not see it. And a lot of people took on Zecharia Sitchin's work. Okay? And what Zecharia Sitchin taught is that humanity is fundamentally a slave race, that humanity is a slave race. Humanity as we know it is a slave race. Okay? And he believed that humanity was a slave race because he had interpreted these Sumerian tablets that told humankind's history. Okay? And this led to all different types of conversations on shows like Ancient Aliens, and again, it really blew up in the community, and people really began to think that we human beings are here in this petri dish, and we have these parent beings or progenitor beings that are really the driving mechanism for our society. And so there was this incredible external focus that was happening as people were thinking about ETs and thinking about interdimensionality and thinking about human origin. Suddenly we're, believing that human beings were a slave race and here to mine gold. Okay? This was a narrative for a long time. But a lot of people didn't agree with it. A lot of people didn't agree with Zecharia Sitchin. And other people who were Sumerian scholars, in which there were very few. And this is one of the reasons why Zecharia Sitchin's work progressed for so long and why he got so much traction, is because there just were not a lot of people who knew how to read ancient Sumerian. And so, but over time, people began to read his work and they began to go up against it. And I'm not sure if the website is up now or the work is up now, but there was a website dedicated to basically correcting Zecharia Sitchin, and it turned out a lot of scholars on ancient Sumerian did not believe that the tablets said that at all. And they didn't know how he got that from the tablets. And this was very interesting to me because I believed it. I believed, like everybody else that was sort of in the spiritual scene like 10 years ago, that, oh, okay, well, we were genetically modified. That explains why there's, the missing link. And, we're kind of lower beings, but we're learning. And there's going to be this parent race that comes back. And that there's this advanced progenitor race that kind of comes in and checks on us. And we kind of are where we are, this mixture of basically animal and divine human. We don't really know what's in between that, but, there's this, we're just basically animal and divine human, and we're trying to build out what's in between. And a lot of people still believe that to this day, but I want to introduce a different concept to you. I'm not going to tell you what to believe. You can believe whatever you want, but I'm going to introduce another concept to you so that at least it's something to think about. If you look back in ancient traditions, because sometimes we go off the rails a little bit in modern times where, we have a little bit of a Luciferian edge where we just sort of want to forget everything about spiritual classics and what the ancients believed. And we kind of want to just sort of scientifically decide what we think is real. And it's not always good to do that. But ancient traditions have a often very different basis for what humankind is, what humanity is. Okay? And they portray humanity as the personification of the Christ impulse, the personification of God, the direct personification of God, not the indirect, but directly forming or organically forming like a plant grows. The human form emerged. And it started in a higher dimension, a higher density. That's less dense, but higher in regards to where we are. And we were sort of more like, a lot of people see it more as being like a jelly, more like, it was a lot less dense than where we are now. And as time evolved, the human being became denser and denser and denser and denser. And as the human being became denser and denser and denser, it could carry a more complex soul. And as the human being became denser and denser and denser into the physical body that we have now, which is made of bone and flesh and sinew and blood, this is a beautiful evolution of God, of consciousness through mankind that took a very long time to build into what it is. And that's why we call it the divine temple. Okay? It's many millions and millions of years of adaptation, okay, to get where we are now and adjusting and being able to form the kind of diverse soul that we have, which is extremely individuated. The power and the concentration of a soul inside a physical body is incredibly powerful. It's like an incredibly powerful laser point, okay? And this is also what Blavatsky taught, and what Theosophy teaches, and what Anthroposophy teaches as well. They see the human form as being a condition of a changing environment organically over time, and the planet moving through various different cosmic evolutions and different densities. Okay? So, do you see how these two are so different? And maybe you could say, you could take a moderate position, and maybe you could say, well, you know, we are divine beings that have been modified perhaps, or perhaps some people have been modified from a lower form. Okay, but that doesn't discount that human beings are literally divine expressions of God. We are divine expressions of the Godhead that evolved into this exact form because it is a mirror of God. And that's why when you get into a lot of mystery teachings, a lot of buildings will actually be a metaphor for the human body. And you get into a lot of rituals and it's a metaphor for the human body because the human body represents God. Okay? So we have this conversation where it's very different to say that there was a primate being on the planet and advanced progenitor beings that were basically farther along than where we are now, genetically modified us and created this form. An external being took an ape or took a lower form and then merged themselves with it to create this form. That is a very different way of creating a form than that the form has created over millions and millions and millions of years and adapted to different densities to this exact point where it can move as a smooth organic machine to hold this soul. These are very different ideas, and it really is the difference between the divine man, the organic man, and the Christ impulse incarnate into a form, every one of us, or the slave man. This is what we will see in the New Age, and this is what we will see more and more and more in conversation, is this idea that man is a slave, that man was created as a slave. And what happens to your consciousness when you hear that you were created as nothing more than a slave? It gets kind of low, and it gets hard for you to connect with your Christ consciousness. It gets hard for you to connect with your spirit because there's just something about you that's now lowly, that's detached. This is a divergent idea. This is the separating of human beings from their divinity by an ideology. When human beings believe that they are basically created to be slaves, it's very hard for them to not think of themselves as slaves. And a human society or human beings that begin to think that they are slaves of some kind of advanced progenitor race will begin to act like slaves to them. Should something appear in the sky one day, should exalted beings suddenly appear as we move into the spacefaring age, should Project Bluebeam happen or whatever, If humanity believes that they are slaves and that's all they are and that's how they were fundamentally created, they are very easy to conquer. They are very easy to control. When humanity understands that they are divine, they are very difficult to conquer, very difficult to control. And so we have to be very, very aware of what these ideas do to us in forming our beliefs. Okay? Another example of this is that ETs, or humanity in general, is the result of various ETs coming in and just basically creating our DNA. There may be creator beings that work with us, but again, it's symbiosis. It's not roughly taking people and changing them to the point that humanity only relies on this external source. They only rely on this parent race. They only rely on this race of parent beings to evolve. And these parent beings come back and they go, but humanity needs them to evolve. Do you see where this can go? How disempowering this is? When we understand the mechanism of evolution is what? Inside. Okay? And humanity has spirit guides, and humanity has amazing beings, incarnated, not incarnated, that guide humanity to awaken through respect and through gentle teaching and through example, not through abductions, not through forcing themselves upon humanity, but through entrainment, gentle entrainment, as I was talking about earlier, about these beings that come from the Christ stream. They're not looking to do these external things. They're not looking to come down as saviors. You would never know who they are. They would never say that they were that. They would never say that they were that. They would never call themselves a parent race. They would never call themselves a progenitor. They would never encourage you to look outside of yourself. They will encourage you to know thyself. Big difference. Okay? Humanity is now awakening to its divinity and becoming self-reliant. It's going inward. We're coming into this age of Aquarius where now we're going to take all of that darkness from the dark age, alchemize it, and pow, we're going to go into a golden age. We're going to be in that ascension cycle. And this means self-reliant, going inward, self-responsibility, all that good stuff we were talking about earlier. Not humanity relying on an outside influence to evolve. Humanity does not rely on a savior being, on a savior race, on anything external to come here and tell us who we are. We are we are beings that organically evolve by connecting with our soul, which we also understand as the Christ stream, okay? That is how we evolve. Because that higher dimensional force that is the Christ stream, that is our soul, is so powerful that it begins to alchemize our pain, okay? Okay, the other thing that we find is the conversation about the Nephilim, or the children of angels. And one of the conversations is that there are human beings that are really part ET that walk among us. Like basically their genetics are taken and spliced very externally, very obviously. And these beings are basically alien. So there's basically these aliens that walk amongst us. Again, very external, okay? Leaves that portal open for beings to kind of come in from an outside world or outside place. It leaves it open for divergent timelines to come in, if you know what I'm saying. The reality is that a lot of the time what we think are hybrids, or what we think would be, traditional Nephilim or just advanced human beings, are just literally advanced human beings. They are literally human beings like you, like anybody else, that have built up their life force energy. They've built it up to the point where their psychic circuitry is awake, and they now have exalted abilities. Their There's nothing outside coming in. There's no anointing from an outside force. It is literally through awakening, inner awakening, that they did that. And to say that it is somehow purely a genetic splicing takes away that inner process of alchemy that humanity does. It takes away humanity's desire to connect with and know their spirit. Okay? Do you see how that, it's very subtle. It can be very subtle. But that emphasis should be on awakening your DNA. It should be on knowing that no matter where you are, no matter who you are, you can connect with that Christ consciousness within you. And you can evolve no matter where you are, no matter how low you are, no matter how tough you're having a time. It's always within you. Okay? It is just alchemy. Taking that and I think causing a distraction by saying that anybody that's exalted has had some kind of work done. This is a dangerous idea to get too deeply into. And there are also various, I would say, perhaps certain bloodlines on the planet that have specifically formed or work that can contain more chi or can contain more vril. But that doesn't mean that these people aren't human. It's sort of like if you are attracted to spiritual people and you sort of have a system that maybe can hold a higher frequency, then it's not like that's an alien. It's just literally there's certain bloodlines that represent that higher force. But even people, even if you're talking about something like the fall of Atlantis and the exalted humans that were in Atlantis, these are not aliens, okay? Human beings from a bit of a higher density or Earth on a different timeline, these are not alien. These are human beings that have the exact system as you do. It's just farther along. And it's really important to know that this is not an alien thing. In a sense, with grays, these are still humans too, but they look deformed because they took the divergent timeline. But do you see how this is more about interdimensionality and shifting through time than it is about actually aliens from other places coming in? This is really, really, really important to know. Okay, so advanced humans are immediately assumed to be genetically modified, okay? Genetically modified alien hybrids at the expense of understanding the power of human spiritual development. The emphasis is often either more on external development versus the divine power of humanity, okay? And when we believe the power is outside of us more, and that idea is introduced to us, what happens is there's a subtle entraining of our power outside of our body to outside forces. Okay? Okay, and so a lot of people may be saying, doesn't hybridization exist? Gigi, you've talked about this before. What is the role of hybridization? Well, hybridization actually does exist. There was hybridization going on in World War II with the Nazis. There's various hybridizations going on with animals and with people, I think, in government programs. And there's various different forms and experiments that have been done on people and with various interdimensional beings, okay? Hybridization does exist. But, and this is the but, this is the defining point. It is not the driving force of human evolution. Hybridization is not the driving force of human evolution. It is not why humanity evolves. The mechanism of humanity is what? The Christ impulse, Christ consciousness, our higher self. That is the mechanism that we align with and we evolve from. By embodying that, we evolve. If enough people in society embody that and align with that, society evolves. Yes, there's hybridization. It does happen. Yes, gene splicing occurs. We have CRISPR already And it's probably been going on for a long time. We even have various species that naturally interbreed. Those are hybrids. And certain various different alien races, or excuse me, ET races have hybridized. But it is not the mechanism of evolution, and to think that is the exact thing that the Greys thought, because they thought that any mistakes that they made, they could just hybridize themselves with something that had achieved it. They believed that the driving mechanism of consciousness was basically physical, or could be controlled through the physical plane. The other day, Elon Musk said, why can't a human being just go into a cocoon and turn into a butterfly? We have the DNA, we have the system, we can just turn on the DNA that does that. This is the thinking, is that if we end up making a mistake, or if we end up evolving in a certain direction, we'll just merge with an insect, or we'll just merge with a reptile, or we'll just merge with our ancestors' DNA. And then we'll just fix the mistake there by adding these genes. But they're not realizing that the DNA is really activated, and humanity's evolution impulse and healing and regeneration, all of that is done through our spirit, through integrating our spirit in the body, through everything that we've been talking about today. Okay? And this gets into, I think that I'm running a little long, so I'm not going to get into it, but I did want to talk about Mars a little bit, but I'm going to save that for an extra episode. Mars and the Antichrist impulse, and how our consciousness has to be basically rooted in beyond 5D to create life. You have to have an extremely exalted state of consciousness to create life, to play God, to gene splice, to terraform a planet. It has to be linked in with a very high coherency, because what happens is the life form over time, or the planet over time, will go through various cosmic cycles like this, and it will essentially rewrite itself. It'll break itself down and rewrite itself like this, going through time. The human being will, and the planet will. And if you're doing it from a lower consciousness, a 3D consciousness, you don't have the reach cosmically to all of those codes to create something that can last that rewriting. It can't survive the processes of ascension and descension. It just breaks down over time. The planet will break down. The planet that somebody forcibly tried to terraform, the planet wasn't ready. The planet was in retreat. The planet was not wanting to be terraformed. You forcefully push yourself on a planet. You forcefully create your body into something else, and you don't align it with the higher impulses. It will die. Because consciousness has to be created has to be aligned with a creator being level of consciousness, which is extremely high. It's higher than 5D. It's extremely high, and only then can something be created over very long periods of time, like we were talking about, that can host life indefinitely and host a life form that can evolve. Okay, so this is where we see how playing God is really a dead end. It really is the Antichrist force. It really is a dead end. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to finish this off with 2 different hybridization myths, and then I'm going to take your questions, okay? So the first myth is that Jesus is a hybrid that was subject to genetic manipulation by advanced godlike beings. So you see this as being an example of Jesus is a gray human hybrid, and I posted this on the forum. Someone who said this on the forum. So basically, Jesus is a hybrid between a human being and a gray. Jesus is a hybrid between a human and a Pleiadian. Jesus is a hybrid between a human and a Venusian. And what this myth is that Jesus was taken and he became a master, because his DNA was altered on a ship, or his DNA was changed by this advanced civilization or this advanced being, and that this is what made him a great teacher. It's the hybridization that he went through that made him a great teacher. This is not true. This is a myth, and I'm going to tell you why. Jesus was a human, okay? Buddha was a human. The great avatars of our past and that will come in our future and everyone in between in that Christ stream is human. It is an organic stream. And the focus is on natural, organic, spiritual evolution. And the focus is through that natural, organic, spiritual evolution, you go through various what are called initiations. Initiations and you return back to your higher self. And these initiations are the process of becoming a master. And your consciousness begins to move and align through the various suns system. And you begin to contain a more and more powerful soul through various lives of initiation. Okay? So he represents something that humanity can achieve organically. He represents something that everybody can do. The same with the Buddha, the same with the great avatars, Krishna, okay? He did not achieve what he achieved because somebody external came in and adjusted his DNA, voila. He earned that ability. He earned that. That is what makes a master. Going through great pain, suffering, confusion, loss, you name it, dark night of the soul, and overcoming it. That is what makes you a master. That is what makes you an ascended being. That is what makes you a Christ figure. And to not understand that is to not understand our own evolution. It is to not understand how we heal, how we evolve. And I understand that we are coming to terms with being interdimensional or multidimensional. And I understand that there are interdimensional beings, and I understand that there are ETs and things like this. But we got to be very careful how we begin to communicate these ideas, okay? So Jesus was an advanced human. And he achieved that. And he got the codes of ascension and he gave them to humanity, okay? So the idea that they were kind of, it was spliced together and things like that, this is denying the very difficult and intense process that the human soul goes through to get where he did, okay? All right, the second thing that, the second myth that we find is that the Immaculate Conception was actually in vitro, was some kind of in vitro. Basically, this is another aspect of the gene splicing where Jesus was taken up on a craft, Mary was taken up on a craft, and basically maybe Jesus was created in like a petri dish or, you know, what have you, altered and basically placed inside of Mary's womb. So Mary is basically pregnant with this kind of hybridized being. And this is why it was immaculate. This is why she was a virgin. The reason why she's a virgin is because of in vitro fertilization by an alien, by some parent race that looks over humanity, okay, creates these Messiah figures for us. No. Jesus, Jesus' story is very unique. His level of initiation was extremely high and his story was very unique. And I'm going to have to go into that in a different time. But this answer will apply to not only Jesus Christ, but also other exalted souls that have come through, because it's probably the best way to answer this question. Exalted beings are born through specific channels and often through ancient Isis rituals. Okay, so this is part of the feminine mysteries that is so lost today, that I do try to touch on, and I will teach more on in my Isis Mysteries series. But a huge portion of the feminine mysteries are birthing mysteries, or they are about the conscious incarnation of an exalted soul. This is the highest thing in the Isis mysteries to do. It is what the priestesses, part of what they work for, okay, is to be able to align, is to be able to raise your frequency so much that you can align your womb to various star systems that they align in the higher planes, that you create such a powerful vacuum in your being that you can suck into your womb and into your being an exalted soul. There is nothing about that process that involves abduction, that involves genetic manipulation. It is literally something that women can do. It is literally one of the most sacred Isis mysteries known. So what happens when we think that? What happens when we think that Christ is the result of, the great masters are the result of some parental being coming in and creating it in the womb, and then you pop out an exalted being? What happens to our consciousness? We forget. We forget who we are. We forget our power. We forget how to ascend. We forget ancient mysteries that are set to rise in the Aquarian age. And so Mary, it was one of the names for the high priestess or for the queen. Okay, and the high priestess and the queen was the same thing. So when you look back into like Isis, and you look back into the ancient pharaohs and the ancient kind of goddesses, this is the story that this is what the feminine does. And you always see Horus, or you always see Jesus. This is talking about conscious conception, okay? And there is a point where it actually can be immaculate if the frequency can be high enough. Okay, you actually can, it can just be an electrical impulse. I'm not going to get into that very deeply today, but I do want to introduce this idea to you, because the idea that masters are created through genetic manipulation robs us of our past, and it robs us of who we really are, okay? So the high priestesses were queens, and you couldn't be, considered a queen or a leader unless you had achieved that. So there was a natural aligning with morality and spirit that would be within a queen or within a king, within a priest king or a priestess queen, high priestess queen. And the queen would give birth to an exalted child, okay? And this is why we see the same imagery throughout time. We see Isis and Horus, okay? And we also see Mary and Christ. It is the same teaching. It is the same mystery repeating itself for a different phase of consciousness, but it is the same thing. And nowhere in those rock carvings, nowhere in those mysteries does it involve in vitro fertilization. It is all the power of human resonance and what a human being can do when they are aligning with the stars, when they are aligning properly and building up their essence, okay? They were often called also Mary or Mère, which is in French, it means sea, okay? So this is part of that ancient culture, okay? And you may notice that in Jesus's life, he's married to two Marys. He's surrounded by two Marys, okay? This is very, very significant. Why would two people in his life be called that? It is talking about the Isis mysteries and the Isis queens, okay? It's talking about the high priestesses. It's talking about being highborn, what you would call highborn. And this was a great gift to humanity. When these exalted souls come through, they come through as loving. They come through as compassionate. They come through as taking on humanity's every struggle. This is not a domination thing. This is not a might is right thing. This is, we have to understand that this is taking on humanity's pain into the body, into their own consciousness, and then transforming it and giving us the codes. Okay, that is the difference. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. We could obviously go deeper and deeper, but I'm going to leave it here because we're now at 5 o'clock so we went really long. So I'm going to take your questions now, and I'm going to get through as many as I can. All right. So, okay, this says, I am shown psychically an ascended holy king coming from heaven to influence this era, but the face I see for this king is more reflective of a Hindu avatar, similar to the face of Krishna, rather than Jesus. Do you think we can connect to the Christ stream just as easily through Krishna's aspect? Okay. This is a really great question, and to be honest with you, it's really up to you. The one thing that I would say is that every single avatar or great teacher comes for a time. So they really represent the time that they're in, and they're really addressing the problems in humanity that humanity is having. So, you know, Christ is the teacher for the Piscean age, and there's different teachers for various times. So if you are connecting with Krishna or you are connecting with the Buddha, you're going to also be simultaneously connecting with the age in which they came to heal. And we are not completed beings. We may think we are sometimes, certainly, but we are not completed beings in the sense that we don't have all the answers and we don't have every single timeline within us healed. And so we will find ourselves throughout our life leaning into various different teachings, various different avatars. You may lean into Krishna. You may be drawn to that energy and it may just feel so good and it may inform you. And that may be something that you enjoy. You may lean into the Buddha. You may lean into Christ. But understand that you're also tapping into the time and the era in which they are from. And you really do have to go with your intuition on it. But the most important thing is that we understand that the Christ stream, the Christ impulse, is the force in which the avatars come from. And they lead into one another and they evolve through one another. So Christ is the evolution of Buddha. Buddha came, achieved a certain level, humanity moved forward, Christ comes, achieves the next level, humanity moves forward. And this is the evolution of Christ consciousness in society and how the individualities will come in for a time, take on the pain, take on the problems of humanity, and then they'll go and they'll leave it behind. Okay, that's the thing. So I would definitely communicate with it however you see it. And you may find yourself really loving different teachings, okay, depending on where you are. Okay, this one is the abduction DNA harvesting by the Greys an attempt to reconnect with the organic timeline, or is it bringing them even deeper into the divergent timeline? This is such a great question. So in their mind, it is so materialistic and they're so obsessed with the material plane and believing that everything can be solved through just moving around parts, just moving around the DNA. If we just had the right DNA again, had the right codes, then we would be able to figure it out. And this is too much focus on the material plane. This is the height still of reductionist materialism, because you can't put a microscope on the most dense parts and expect to find spirit. Spirit has to be aligned with. You can't find spirit only through the mind, only through analysis, only through outward. You have to go inward too. You have to fall into the unseen, okay? And so it it is an attempt to reconnect. It is an attempt to heal their form. It is an attempt to heal their form. And continue their species, and they hope to basically reintegrate with society. They want their hybridized lineage to be re-merged. A lot of the stuff about first contact and beginning to connect with these hybridized grays is because they want to eventually merge back in with humanity, and that would represent them coming full circle. In their mind, that would represent them healing and coming full circle. The emotional, intuitive element was destroyed. And so a lot of the gray beings don't have the level of empathy or compassion, even the hybridized ones, that humans do. They're trying to get it back, but I don't think that they can necessarily process emotion and spirituality on the same level as humans do. They don't have the same level of inner capacity that an organic human does. They try to make it up with technology, okay? So it is an attempt to reconnect with the organic timeline, but it is still way too much focused on the human body or physicality. And I would say that, is it bringing them even deeper into a divergent timeline? I think that you could argue that it is. While they may be restoring some level of the DNA through forcibly taking it from humans and through a hybridization process, if they're not developing the spiritual element, then it's not going to be genuinely connected to the organic timeline, because the organic timeline is body, mind, spirit. It's not just body, mind. The grays are body, mind. Okay? So they would have to go through intense initiation to get that back. And I would say that at our timeline, they're not there yet, because they have to get back to the level where they can actually perceive it. That's how bad it went, is that they lost the ability to even, perceive emotion and spirit, right? We're born more or less with that ability as organic humans. It's changing, but, so the problem is the only way that the grays could move into a genuine organic timeline is through atonement, is through basically admitting to what they did, going through the process of apology and reconciliation. But there is no movement for that. I've never seen a movement where people who channel the grays or who are representative of the grays come forward and tell humanity not to go into transhumanism at length. They never come forward and say, we were the dark brotherhoods. We were the dark sisterhoods. We were the dark charge, the dark antichrist charge of humanity. We didn't pass our initiation, so we tried to come back and take your genetics. We're very sorry, and we want to answer any of your questions about this now, and we are here to address this. I have yet to see that as being a major theme for people who channel the grays. It's mainly on how wonderful hybridization is, how wonderful the gray hybrids are. It's all about often merging back in humanity. You see this desire for preparing humanity for contact and for these hybrids to come back in humanity as teachers, the grays to reemerge back into humanity. But it's missing the step of apology, of atonement, and admitting what they did, and also having to face the wrath of humanity and answer to humanity to a degree that is satisfactory to humans. So this is completely avoided, and that to me says that they're not at the level of connecting with the organic timeline because they're not being honest. Most of their movement and most of their channelings in which they still communicate with human beings is all about having them merge back into society as hybrids or contacting and often as exalted humans. They want to come back in as these teachers, as these great spiritual teachers that are going to gift us with all this knowledge and technology. There is no atonement. There is no apology for basically raping humanity, for hurting humanity, for traumatizing humanity. There's not enough of an apology there, an atonement, which senses to me that the emotional level and the spiritual level is not actually developed yet. Okay? Okay, so this one is from, at which point do we stop calling ourselves human? Are Pleiadians, Arcturians, Sirians all timelines of humanity based on cosmic referencing as well? Yeah. This is, these represent specific levels of initiation for humanity. And that is the best way that I would place it. Now, there may be different timelines where it could get a little bit complex if you wanted to zoom out for the people who can really think huge. There may be certain timelines where that were extremely divergent. Say you take the grays, but then say you do evolve them back into some higher form. Okay, maybe they could go through some type of thing and look different or whatever. There may be different connections with it, but the most value when we talk about Pleiadians, when we talk about Arcturians and Sirius, we have to look at the star value and what the star means to Earth, or what the star means to humanity, and what the very specific initiation or what the energy is for humanity. So our sun actually contains the digested rays of Alcyon, Sirius, and Arcturus. Our sun is the conglomerate of higher dimensional stars and steps down that energy. And there's a series of stargates that we can take when we're being psychic or whatever it is. And different beings that are associated with those spheres or those suns will call themselves that. And they can look different because they may be from divergent timelines. They may be lying about their timelines. There are a lot of humanity is not yet awake enough to discern false light that is existing in the lower astral plane from actual, genuine, raw, pure light that is emitted from a higher being. We're not yet at that thing, so we can also see that beings can sometimes appear or say that they're from certain places, but they're not, okay? An example of that would be like, you have basically Nordic people, say someone from the Lebensborn program in Germany where they just started breeding the tallest people they could find. And then eventually over, 60, over however many years, you've got a few generations and that they're extremely tall Nordic looking people. You could say this is a Pleiadian. You could say this is a Venusian. And they may look that way if you don't have your third eye open, or if you're uninitiated into these topics. You could have a gray, say I'm Arcturian, or say I'm this or I'm that, and they could be completely, So it's really, the development of discernment is really, I wish that it wasn't this complicated. I wish that every single interdimensional being was just honest about what they're doing, where they're from. But all of this is to teach us discernment, is to teach us how to develop ourselves so that we can read energy again. This is part of how we rise back into our higher form, is we have to be exposed to lies. We have to be exposed to divergent timelines and shadow versions of ourselves, personally and at large. And then we have to learn discernment, and it's that process of discernment that allows us to choose the higher rays, to choose higher consciousness and climb back up, okay? All right. Okay, thank you for all the clarity you can bring. Well, thank you. Can you please speak on how anger can be used in a way that's serving to our highest good right now? Ooh, good question, because there's a lot of anger going around. Is there a place where Christ consciousness and anger alchemize in a way that is of service? Okay, so there is something called righteous anger, but we have to be very careful whether our righteous anger is actually just bitterness or actually just pure anger, and it's not actually it's not actually creating an upward pull. So anger is a transitional emotion. A transitional emotion. What does that mean? It means that we are not designed to stay in anger for long periods of time. If we stay in anger for long periods of time, the body will degenerate, the mind will degenerate, the emotions will degenerate, the human being will degenerate. So anger, really the purpose of anger is to identify it as something is not in alignment. Something is upsetting me. Usually it's an injustice. There's an injustice going on. So when you feel anger, you have to say, what is the injustice? What is the injustice that I am feeling? Ask yourself that question. Identify the injustice and identify the problem, and then focus on the solution. Focus on carrying out the solution. Okay? So anger is useful in the sense that it draws your attention to something that is out of balance. And it creates a fire in you that says, I want this to be different. I want this to be different. Okay? This is very important. This is it's a very important condition, because without anger, we're not going to know what we stand for. We're not going to know what our boundaries are. We're not going to know a lot of specifics. So anger leads us into these specifics about ourselves that we can really come to know. But again, if you stay into it, if you stay in that energy, you're not designed. We are really designed to be in peace. We are beings that are designed to be in basically harmony or peace. That is the energy that we thrive in as humans. It allows us to tap into all different aspects of ourselves and be fed by lower aspects, higher aspects. Peace and harmony allows us to oscillate properly. We're not designed to stay in extreme ecstatic joy where our energy is really going really fast. We can use little bits of joy to raise our kundalini at certain times, or psychically you can use joy to raise your frequency and then bring it back down to peace. That's one of the 7 veils. Okay? But you're not actually designed to stay in joy either, in extreme joy. We are designed to really stay in a peaceful smile, a peaceful observational smile. And anything that crosses that path, anything that washes across our being, is something that we get to know ourselves better from. So there are a lot of people who basically are angry all the time. They're just angry all the time. They cannot wait to get their anger out, and they say this is righteous anger, and they just hang out in anger, and they're just like, this is, and it's like, well, that is using righteous anger. That's spiritualizing anger because you don't want to face the anger. Okay? We have to understand that. And so anger can be used for our highest good by understanding why it's appearing. Is it a personal, is it an external event that's bringing up a personal injustice? Whenever anger comes forward, there's something that needs to be balanced, okay? And so the best thing to do with your anger is to figure out what that is and to work on what that is. And you'll find that the anger will be alchemized and transformed into wisdom, okay? All right. So it looks like I've got one more question. And this question is, how long can people in the organic timeline exist with people in the divergent timeline? Will there be an actual physical split of the higher and lower Earth at some point? This is such a great question. Thank you for asking it. I'm always, whenever I have these conversations with you guys, I'm always so blown away by how good your questions are. I'm always so impressed. Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually all part of a natural phenomenon. All of this is natural. I've been using the word Christ impulse and Antichrist impulse because these are really two impulses. These are really two cosmic impulses that are raw. They're pure impulses. And they're the defining energies that create our reality, really, in a lot of the ways. Okay? And what will happen is we'll go through various ages, and we can see it in the precession of the equinox. But there's these large cycles where you'll basically go through a period of immense growth as one planet and one civilization. You'll go through a golden age, and then you'll go through a dark age, and then there'll come a time that's called Judgment Day, or it's called the Reckoning. The Hopi called it the two paths, the time of the two paths. And what it basically is, sometimes it's called apocalypse, Armageddon, and what this really is at the end of a cycle, and the ancients knew these cycles, by the way. The ancients knew that humanity moved in these huge cycles of time that were really representative of their consciousness. It really represented humanity moving through a specific phase of consciousness, okay? And they knew that at the end of the phase, they would have gone through a descension and a golden age, and that they would be coming full circle. And so there'd be this consolidation period. The Hopi call it the two worlds. In tarot, it's the Judgment Day, Armageddon. It's biblical. It's, in the Mayan calendar, the Mayan long count calendar tracked it, put us up to around 2012 or so. It's debated, and at this time, these two streams become very obvious. So where we are now, the streams become very obvious. The Christ stream becomes very obvious. We would have had a teacher. We would have had our world's teacher. We would have had our avatar come in to give us the lessons we need to learn. And then we have an Antichrist figure come in that is the exact antithesis, the exact antagonist to the Christ force. And there's a whole culture that emerges at this time very clearly as an Antichrist culture, the complete inversion of what is holy. But it was building for a very long time. And then in Steiner's work, he calls it the spirits of form. But what happens is at the end of a cycle, everything starts to condense, magnify, and become more obvious, which is where we are now. And so this leads up, these two timelines lead up to that physical split. Eventually things pressurize and pressurize and pressurize. And this isn't going to happen today or tomorrow. It's going to happen, much later. But it's going to start now. Souls will start funneling into different places now. But what will happen is there'll be a 5D Earth, or like a higher Earth. In the Steiner's cosmology, it's called New Jupiter. And in New Age cosmology, it's often just called the New Earth. And then there will be a lower Earth that's formed. It's actually lower than 3D in a lot of ways. It's actually denser. And that's the lower world. In Steiner's cosmology, which I am a fan of, he calls it the 8th sphere. Okay, so what ends up happening is everything just compresses to the point where some people are brought so close to their shadow, and so, they're catalyzed into aligning with their Christ element. And then some people are just catalyzed and they align with the Antichrist element, which do go to create two very distinct worlds that they will begin incarnating into. Okay, and that's what all of this is really about. So there will be an actual physical split of a higher and lower Earth. Okay, and this is in a lot of different mythologies. This is in a lot of different teachings. It's biblical. This is something that great initiates have been preparing mankind for. And that's why we look around into the landscape of humanity today and we see so much crazy stuff going on, is because the lower Earth, the lower world, the lower breakaway civilization, the Antichrist impulse, the transhumanist movement, all of that is it's threatening to kind of pull humanity down into it. And everything that we're seeing in the world is this, everything dark, everything that's kind of a struggle, we can see it as that Antichrist impulse, which is parasitic by nature, which feeds on humanity by nature, needing to secure its resource. Again, that Antichrist impulse, that lower breakaway civilization, they don't have that connection to spirit. They don't have, they're vampiric. They've lost their connection by their own choice. They need to feed on humanity. They take its DNA. They need to feed on humanity. So they need to secure their resource. This is why we see the power systems collapsing in our world today. This is why we see transhumanists being rushed along way faster than any human cares to connect with. This is why we see things like Agenda 21, 2030, to move all of humanity into big cities and little shoeboxes where they're highly surveilled and they can be subject to intense frequencies that are mess up with their bioenergetic field, this intense need to do mRNA vaccines that alter your genetic language, your body's genetic language with one another. We've been talking a lot about DNA today. Suddenly we're facing these vaccines that affect our mRNA. It's being pushed down our throat, locked in our homes. All of this stuff that's going on has a deeper level that we need to understand. Because the lower world, that Antichrist impulse, the lower earth that will split, needs resources. They're parasitic, they're vampiric, and they would like to trap humanity into a lower consciousness so they can feed on it, okay? This is what is going on. We have to start connecting the occult, spiritual level of information to what's going on. Everything will begin to make sense if we can do that. We are not designed as human beings to live with this tiny little view of our life. The ancients, the great civilizations before us, thought in long strides. They incorporated where humanity was in their evolution of consciousness. And today we can't even decide if we have consciousness, if we have a soul. And the ancients calculated everything because we had a soul. And they knew that at the end of every cycle, there's a lower world and a higher world. There's an opportunity to ascend, but also descend. Okay? All right. This one is, I'm not going to say any names because this is going to be on YouTube, and I don't want to say the names of my members. So this one says, if I understand right, Christ embodies the ascending force in a more general, more complete, more balanced way. Lucifer instead leads to a more linear development. Can you speak about their connection? I always thought of Christ balancing Lucifer. As always, listening to your thoughts, pure joy. Yes, well, I hadn't actually considered or woven in Lucifer or Lucifer gnosis into this talk. But Christ does join Lucifer. Christ balances Lucifer and Christ balances Ahriman. Christ joins them. Christ balances them. Christ is the force within us that balances our Luciferic elements, or Lucifer within us, and also the Ahrimanic elements, or Ahriman within us. Christ is that middle force, that stream that is alchemical. What does alchemical mean? Alchemical means it's bringing these energies into balance and producing that third force, that gold, that Christ force. So the Christ force is that balancing force, as you say. But when I'm talking about the Christ stream and Christ consciousness, I'm fundamentally speaking to it as a today as an impulse, as a pure, raw impulse. Lucifer represents a personification. Many people see Lucifer as sort of a personification more. And this is, when I'm talking about Christ impulse today, at least, it's really a very vast, I'm coming from a very vast concept that is the pure golden alchemizing concept within humankind that joins the upward pull that Lucifer represents for mankind, that wildness, but also that lower densifying pull, that materializing pull that Ahriman represents. So we have the Ahriman force in us, that densifying heavy force. And by the way, right now I'm using Steiner's cosmology. I highly recommend checking out his teachings on Lucifer and Ahriman. They are the best to describe these spiritual forces that we have today, in my opinion. So Christ stands between these two elements, and he is the joiner. He joins them. He balances them, okay? It is that Christ is the third alchemical force that balances them and creates the new form, creates the new world, okay? Does that make sense? So today I'm talking about it more as an alchemical pure force that can take form. It can be an individual, okay? It can be a group. It can be a pure vast consciousness, okay? That is sort of, I'm talking about Christ as a multi-dimensional presence within humankind. It's an extremely balanced energy. It is what we fell from and where we're going in many ways. The experience and the journey of Christ, the journey of humanity, as it moves into the third density, it kind of splits into Ahriman and Lucifer, these two forces, the twins, the brothers that are at odds. And it's the Christ force that unifies them, and it's the unifying of these two forces within us that catalyzes us into a new world. Does that make sense? So it's I'm talking about it very much in an energetic force today. But we definitely need to have a conversation about Lucifer, the Lightbringer, and the Luciferian forces in society, the dark and the light, and Christ and everything like that. But that would be a little bit more personified than I'm bringing it today. Okay, this one says, thank you for your work. How can we continue to have compassion for people in the Antichrist timeline? I'm witnessing so many people in my family falling for this timeline, and it is so hard to watch. How can I help them? Am I supposed to? It's becoming harder and harder to even interact with them. Wow. I think this question is hitting everybody's heart. I think that the last year and even the last several years for many people, they are finding themselves alone. They are finding deep wounds that maybe have been in their family or within themselves coming forward and creating a lot of separation and judgment, and old wounds are coming forward. And it's very hard to, I think, connect with people right now, because it's getting to a point where you're either sort of for humanity or you're against humanity. Things are evolving in our world to the point where that is, for people who are sensitive to energy, for people who feel energy before the physical world, it is very clear that where we are going is very intense and is very scary. And you can look at humanity and you can start to see people's behavior and people's opinions as very clearly being pro-human, very clearly pro-human, pro-organic evolution, and anti-human, and pro-transhumanism, pro-loss of the soul. We're beginning to be able to break down people's belief systems and people's behaviors as really falling into one of these two categories. And some of these people may be your closest friends. Some of these people may be your family members, and it will break your heart knowing that you can take that timeline that we were talking about today, take their energy, take their consciousness, and apply it to a timeline over time. And you can say, well, if you stay in this energy, I can see that this is going to happen. Very hard, very difficult situation. At the end of the day, you can't force awakening on people. We can't force people to see the complex patterns that you have learned to see through many years of probably meditation and development, through many years of studying, quote, conspiracy theories. We cannot force people to suddenly have eyes to see what we had to build our eyes to see. We had to teach ourselves to critically think. It didn't come to us through school. And so there's that process that these people need to go through. And we cannot force it, but what we can do is we can love them anyway. And we can come from our heart. And we can come with the expectation that, hey, I can't change you. I can't get you to do even what's for your own good. But when I'm with you and when I'm talking about you, I can love you unconditionally. And I can be compassionate. And I can just talk to you as a human. I can just talk to you as a person. And I can be at peace with you choosing whatever path you make, because I respect that every human being has free will. And so you have to be in this sort of strange transcendental place where you just love them unconditionally. And you know that just by you talking with them, just by you being around them, just by you being with them, they are in training with your energy, and they will absorb certain codes from you. They will absorb certain information from you. Just by you being together. A lot of communication is really just energetic exchange. And they will absorb things from you that a year later, things may get really tough in their life. And this is the path for a lot of people right now. Things will begin to get really tough. They will begin questioning their reality and asking the right things that they maybe need to ask. And suddenly what you said, or the alchemy that your energy allowed them in that time, will bring them a solution. And they may not even realize it's from you, but you affected them. And so sometimes when we speak with people, when we sit with people, when we are with people, we leave little prayers within them. We leave little pockets of information. We leave little pieces of ourselves and their energy that are saved for a later date. Don't forget that. We are beyond time. We are beyond matter. When we sit with someone and hold space and love them and sit with them, we heal them in ways that we don't even understand sometimes, because we communicate through entrainment and through energy resonance. And so if somebody has a very diametrically opposed opinion to you, you can still connect with them. You can still deposit information. They can still pull information from you, or they can remember to come to you when they do wake up. A lot of things is done like that. A lot of spiritual things happen like that. So that's what I would say there. We are not at the point where the pressure is the most, believe it or not. Over the next 2 years especially, it's going to get more and more intense. We're going to get more and more pressure. And people are going to be forced more and more to wake up. And so some people in your family or some people in the world that are co-workers or whatever, they will begin to wake up, because the pressure for them will finally be enough. You may have waken up a lot earlier because the pressure for you, or just who you are, drew you to this. But for them, it's a little bit of a longer process, and the pain outside of them has to become comparable to the pain inside of them. And they have to say, well, screw it, I'm going to question everything. My reality is falling apart. My world is falling apart. I'm under so much pressure and pain that I don't care if I have to dig deep, because I'm already in so much pain. That is usually the mindset where people begin to change. They have to be catalyzed into that stage through immense pressure, through loss, through having their worldview challenged. And that will happen, but we're not yet at that phase where people feel that yet. A lot of people are still living in a dream world. A lot of people live in an alternate reality. A lot of people are literally believing that the future is going to be very different than what it is going to be. And when that carpet starts to get ripped out from underneath them, there will be enough pain that they will not be so avoidant. They'll be forced to look at things. And that's really what will wake up people who don't want to wake up. All right, so here is our last question today. We are over 3.5 hours, so I'm sure you guys are ready to walk around and stretch, but let's do this one last question together. Can the fear in the divergent stream be understood as a lack of faith in one's heart? Ooh, I like that. I like where you're taking this. There is a need in the mind due to fear to linearly understand evolution with reference to immediately perceivable external and not jumping timelines. This is such a great comment. I think that you understand it. And it's crazy how we already know all this stuff. Everything that I've said today is stuff that you actually already know. You already know everything there is to know about the Christ impulse. You already know everything there is to know about the Antichrist impulse. You already know how the mechanics of the cosmos work in timelines. I'm just here to remind something that you already know. And I think these questions are proof of that, because these are very good questions. So you could understand the divergent timeline, the lower breakaway civilization, the Antichrist dream, whatever name you want to call it today. You could understand that as being a lack of faith in one's heart. I think a lack of being able to understand what the heart is. It is a lack of being able to actually crack open into the heart. The heart is actually walled off, shelled off with so much trauma and pain that whenever your higher consciousness goes to it, it just causes pain. It's just the pain is just reverberated through your system. So it's lack of faith in the heart because they don't actually believe it. They don't actually believe, these people believe that the heart is a Hallmark card, that it is just some like weird, weak, sentimental idea that will just get you hurt. People in the divergent timeline that are locked into that lower consciousness believe that emotions are weak. They believe that the heart is weak. They confuse the heart with just instinctive emotions. And they craft their life to, rather than listen to the emotional body, feel the emotions, learn the different frequencies of the emotion and how it resonates in the body and how emotions can be used, they just seek to completely remove emotion because they feel like they're so controlled by their emotion because they've never learned the discipline or value of emotion. These are people who don't really value that level of energy, that level of feminine energy even. And so they think it's masterful. To them, mastery is literally just avoiding emotions. And that's why you look at some of these people who are part of these dark occult groups that are direct incarnations of the Antichrist stream. That's why you see them doing these weird like initiations that are completely traumatizing. I'm not going to get into them. But a lot of the initiations in dark occult groups is literally traumatizing a human being so badly to the point that the emotional body is just an impossible mess. And this is part of shutting down the heart in humanity, shutting down the heart of that person. So the Antichrist stream and all of its dark occult, all of the dark occult stuff that's come out of it, and the secret societies, the dark occult groups, and the dark techno-science stuff, it's all about it's all about destroying the emotional body, destroying the heart, and locking yourself in basically a place where you believe that the mind and will is the most important thing, to the point that nothing else develops. In the Antichrist stream, where we are at this point in time anyway, this civilization where we are, because the Antichrist stream has manifested differently in different eras, but where we are now, it's all about the mind just being everything. And of course, when it gets to this point, the mind can't be God. The mind alone can't even perceive God. The will is very important. It's very important in magical practice. It's very important in life. So is discipline. But the will is not everything. And this group believes that the will and the mind is everything, and that the emotions are just animalistic, the emotions are weak, and it's all about disconnecting yourself from it. But the problem there is that the emotions, the human emotional system, was deeply developed in Mu, in Lemuria especially. The nervous system as we know it, and it's very sophisticated, it's very complex, and human emotion, especially when we start to get into the holy emotions, they actually allow you to generate very specific, they allow you to control your vril. They allow you to concentrate your vril intensely. They allow you to, certain emotions allow you to spread it out. Certain emotions allow you to affect your environment in very specific ways. And as I mentioned in my Venus video, within the Isis mysteries, within the feminine mysteries, part of it is genuinely understanding every single emotion, and how peace does something to the vril, does something to your mind, it does something to your bioenergetic field, it moves it in a certain way. So does joy. Okay? Every emotion, which is basically another talk that we'll have to have, will actually cause your bioenergetic field to do something different. And then the mind is applied to that. Then the will is applied. But in Mu, in ancient times, and also through, some of the great female teachers, the beginning of the vril force energy is really understanding how to build and saturate emotions, and what we would understand as emotions and feelings, creating very specific frequencies of ether, bringing the ether into spinning it and working it in very specific ways. And so the Antichrist stream it's not a stream of union. Christ is also union energy. We were just talking about how it joins Ahriman and Lucifer. It also joins male and female. It also joins Isis and Osiris to create Horus. It is a union stream. It is the perfect balance, right? And so the Antichrist stream will always try to, it is the epitome of imbalance. So it will seek to augment one part of consciousness. And where we are now, it is augmenting mind. And this is where, this is where the might is right comes from, and people thinking that they're gods and stuff like that. Rather than being a symbiosis part of God, they think they are God. They can just go and, terraform or go and do all this kind of stuff. And there's no ability to actually harmonize. There's no ability to even sense if there is a presence to harmonize with, or a planet to harmonize with. There is no ability to harmonize, first and foremost, to use your will to connect. You need both the development, the very precise understanding and development of emotion and feeling, and what that does to your bioenergetic field. Even in the study of auras and the clairvoyant study of auras, we see that very specific emotions produce very specific colors. that people are very specific colors, while our emotions are producing specific results in our bioenergetic field. We cannot remove the emotional system and the emotional body and think that we are masters. And this is what the Antichrist stream does. It removes whatever is needed to be integrated. It says, I don't need to integrate that. I don't need to integrate the feminine, or I don't need to integrate. And it's not just men or anything like that, but there's something that they're not integrating. And for the grays, it is emotion. And they say, we don't need that. And so it's absolutely this disconnect, and they can no longer connect with the heart. And what we know about Christ in particular is that he is a teacher of the heart, and the Christ stream is alive today in the human heart. Okay, that's the chakra system. That's the part of the chakra system that we have to master. But these beings can't even connect with it because of their own doing. Okay, then the last part of the question is, there is a need in the mind due to fear to linearly understand evolution. Well, absolutely, because the heart, once we begin to master mind and emotion, we become interdimensional, which is represented in the heart. The heart is the middle of the being, the middle of our being, and so we are receiving the higher frequencies that are uplifting, and we're also receiving the lower frequencies which are materializing. And the heart is the perfect position where it is integrating and informing our entire energetic system on those two forces. So it's the balance point, 3 above, 3 below. And so when you're in the heart, you're at a place of balance. You have that is where that happens, and then you can go through into higher consciousness, and your being collapses because it's in harmony, and it can take on more and see more timelines. It can see higher energy. It can see beyond the 3D plane and beyond time, but only because your bioenergetic field collapses through the heart, which is associated with what? The sun, which is the Christ stream. That's why we call it the sun, and why they're sun gods or sun goddesses. They are showing us the process of collapsing our bioenergetic field, right? We talked about this with the circuitry. The trunk of the tree is collapsed and connecting into where? 5D, 3D, right? We talked about this. But it's through the heart, through harmonizing the heart, we can collapse, go through the heart, and into the higher spheres where time doesn't exist, and where you are reading realities based on pure resonance. You can travel through time within your consciousness. You can read the Akashic records. It's a whole new world. But as you can imagine, if you are not aligned in your heart, okay, if you're not there, and remember, the heart represents the Christ stream, right? We see those pictures of Christ, and he's got the heart, the sacred heart of Christ. This is why. And if you're not doing that, if you're not doing the present day initiation, you're not able to leave. You're not able to actually perceive beyond this timeline. How could you? You may be able to develop some type of technology that can go a little bit beyond you, or some type of looking glass. You may be able to take a psychic who can. You may be able to, via exploitive means, read certain timelines, but I promise you, those technologies do not come close to an initiated intuitive that can go through the heart and do things. There's going to be much less, and they're going to be much more rigid. And that's one of the reasons why we're also seeing a lot of the crap we're seeing today is they're having trouble reading the timelines. They're having trouble reading energy now. That so much cosmic light is coming in. I feel like I'm losing my voice. So absolutely, when we remove ourselves from our heart, we remove ourselves from interdimensionality. And these beings that are part of that divergent timeline, the divergent stream, the Antichrist stream, they chose mind, and they started investing in mind, will, and that's why when you see them, their head is huge. They've just invested so much energy in the mind at the expense of the body. This just became totally out of proportion, right? change their form. And so, yeah, absolutely. They didn't pass the initiation of the heart. They couldn't get their body, they couldn't get their consciousness into that heart field so they could collapse and be beyond time. So they do obsess over this timeline. And they can't really understand evolution the way that other people can. Yeah, so everything is external. Everything is limited. And even with psychic development, and this is the last thing that I'll say, and I think this is actually one of the most interesting things about psychic development, at least for me, is that you could take 10 psychics and you could put them in a very good development program that was designed to develop them. And every psychic would develop different gifts. Their gifts may overlap in some areas. Some people may be more of a lunar psychic. Some people may be more of a solar psychic. I have an article on this if you want to know what that is. But they may be generally pulling energy in some ways. But when you really sit down with them, when you really talk to them, when you really get to know what their gifts are, you'll find that they have a completely unique background in which they're pulling their information from. They're pulling from like a soul's experience, and that they have access to certain information that you don't. You can talk to a psychic and they'll tell you something about a certain time on the planet or a certain whatever, and they'll have access to that, and for some reason you don't, because you don't have an experience with it, or you weren't there like they were. And so there's this really beautiful thing to our consciousness where psychically we have access to what we are. Okay? And the technologies mirror that. So this is why when I was talking about the advanced civilization, that are connected to the Christ impulse, the progressive civilizations, all of their technology works with the developed streams of the psychics. So their background, past lives they've lived, things like that, and creating these impulses, creating these emotions, and it's incredibly mystical, these technologies. And then when you talk about grays and jumping timelines for the lower civilizations, and the fear-based civilizations, we're looking at a very different type of consciousness. We're looking at very different types of technologies, because, as you're saying, the heart is not activated, okay? And every psychic, every person, every human being has different psychic reach, has different psychic pathways that literally burrow through time differently than you, that literally pull from different worlds and different places. They pull the planets differently. And that is why you're so special. That is why it's so important that you develop. Okay? These lower timelines, they don't have that ability because they don't have the heart active. So they're very limited in the timeline in which they can access. They can pretty much only access their own. They can pretty much only access very limited, as what you're saying here, by comparison. When you develop the heart, when you develop your higher consciousness, you start to be able to do so much more, right? And that is what a lot of people that are associated with the divergent timeline and the lower breakaway civilization, these gross world leaders and stuff, that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid that when humanity begins to truly wake up, which we are now, that they will be rendered so minuscule and so weak and so useless. And that's why all of this is the truth. That's why all of this is going on right now. Is because we are going through our awakening. We are entering that ascension period. Christ consciousness is returning to the planet. It is within each of us, and it is glowing. That's why I'm talking about it today, because it is back. It really returned with the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. We're going to remember what Christ consciousness is and what it is within inside each and every one of us, and that power that it has to transform us, to evolve us. It is the transformative force. And when that gets going, it is terrifying to the lower impulse. It is terrifying to the Antichrist impulse. And what they will do is they will try to create a false awakening so that they can try to trick people into thinking that they are the Christ impulse. And as we emerge into a cosmic society, and as we become spacefaring, and we have the Space Force and all these various different sort of disclosure conversations are casually being had, the movement is growing. We have to understand what is going on. We have to understand that we're going to have to consider spirituality in a cosmic way. Because part of the narrative in the future will be interdimensional beings being progenitors. It will be a lower, parallel, breakaway civilization that is connected with the Antichrist force, trying to present itself as Christ. Now, this is the story of ages. This is not something that I've figured out in a stroke of genius. This is the prophecy of which I am one person sharing it, but that has been shared for, out of the mouths of intuitives and out of the mouths of even the Bible. This has been talked about for a long time, but we need to start understanding it in our modern terms, okay? Because we didn't have, 2,000 years ago, or even longer, when ancient texts were written, we didn't have the consciousness, or we weren't in the right position to name everything accordingly, like the mark of the beast, or describe things. So we have to apply what the Christ impulse is, what Christ consciousness is, what the Antichrist impulse is to our world now. Not in a way where we're labeling people and saying, you're part of the Antichrist force and I'm part of the Christ force. It's not about dividing people. This is not about creating more division. This is about remembering who we are and developing our consciousness to the point where we can discern these two impulses in the world, okay? So, woo! Thank you so much for being with me today, for joining me. As always, it's always my pleasure to be with you. And if you are joining me halfway through, this video will either be in the live section or in the video section. And it will be archived. It's not going to disappear when I'm done. It will be archived, and it will appear on YouTube. I am going to make it a public video for anyone joining me later. It's not exclusive content. You guys just get it first, that's all. And so, as always, all my love your way. It was my absolute pleasure being with you today. You guys rock my world. All my love your way, and I will see you in our next conversation, which is actually next Sunday. So come with your questions. I'll be with you then. Until then, enjoy your Sunday.